As an FBI agent with 14 years of experience investigating some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, I believed that every case, no matter how complex or disturbing, had a logical explanation waiting to be uncovered through methodical investigation, forensic science, and good old-fashioned police work. I was catastrophically wrong. The Whitlock disappearance taught me that some mysteries burrow so deep into the darkest corners of human nature that they leave you questioning not just the nature of evil, but whether the people we trust to protect society are actually the ones orchestrating its destruction. My name is Special Agent Bartholomew Cross, and I've been working out of the Denver field office for 14 years, primarily handling missing persons cases that cross state lines and fall under federal jurisdiction. My clearance rate stands at 87%, and I've never had a case that couldn't be solved through conventional investigative methods. That record ended on November 23, 2018, at exactly 2:22 p.m., when my desk phone rang with a call that would fundamentally alter everything I believed about the depths of human depravity and the reach of organized evil in America. The caller was Commander Ezra Fleming from the Colorado State Police, a 30-year veteran whose voice carried the measured tone of someone who had seen every conceivable horror that humans could inflict upon one another. But today, there was something different in his voice, an edge of confusion and barely controlled terror that I'd never heard from such an experienced officer. Later, I would learn that Fleming had requested early retirement within a week of this phone call, citing health reasons. But I suspect the real reason was that he had seen something that shattered his faith in humanity. "Agent Cross, we need federal assistance immediately," he said without preamble, and I could hear the strain in his voice as if he was fighting to keep his composure. "We have a situation involving a missing elderly couple from out of state, but what we've discovered suggests something much worse than a simple disappearance. This is organized, professional, and so calculated that it makes my skin crawl. I've been a cop for 30 years, Agent Cross, and I've never seen anything like this." I grabbed my standard-issue notebook and started writing, my pen creating the first entry in what would become the most disturbing and complex case file of my career. A file that now sits in a locked cabinet in my basement, because there are some things that shouldn't be accessible to anyone who isn't prepared to lose sleep for the rest of their lives. "Give me the details, Commander." Thaddeus and Evangeline Whitlock, ages 73 and 71 respectively, from Kansas City, Missouri. They were on a driving vacation through Colorado, staying at small-town bed and breakfasts, taking scenic routes, the kind of retirement trip couples dream about their entire working lives. They checked into the Millfield Mountain Inn 3 days ago and were supposed to check out yesterday morning. When they didn't show up for breakfast, the owner went to their room and found... He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "Agent Cross, I've seen homicide scenes, drug violence, domestic abuse cases that would make your stomach turn. But this room... There's something fundamentally wrong with what happened in that room." Millfield was a small tourist town about 180 miles north of Denver, the kind of place that survived on seasonal visitors who came to enjoy the mountain scenery and small-town charm. It was also isolated, surrounded by wilderness areas and connected to major highways by only a few mountain roads, perfect for someone who wanted to make people disappear without witnesses. As I would later discover, this isolation wasn't accidental. The town had been chosen specifically for its geographic advantages in conducting activities that required complete privacy and no interference from law enforcement. "What kind of evidence are we looking at?" I asked, though something in Fleming's tone already suggested that this wasn't going to be a routine missing persons case. "Blood evidence throughout the room, but not random spatter. The pattern is deliberate. Furniture overturned in specific ways, personal items scattered but not randomly. It's like someone was staging a scene for maximum psychological impact on the victims. And Agent Cross, there's something else that's going to disturb you. We found evidence that suggests this wasn't random. Someone had been watching them, studying their routines, documenting their every movement for days before they struck. What evidence? Photographs, Agent Cross. Hundreds of them, hidden in a photographer's blind in the woods behind the inn. But these aren't just surveillance photos. They're artistic compositions, carefully framed and lit, as if someone was creating a portfolio of the victim's final days of freedom. Someone had been conducting professional-level surveillance on this elderly couple for their entire stay, but it goes deeper than that. We found evidence that they'd been watched since they entered Colorado. Maybe longer. The implications sent a chill down my spine that I can still feel today, sitting in my office 5 years later, writing this account with trembling hands. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a planned abduction of specific targets who had been selected, studied, and hunted like animals. But why would anyone target a retired couple from Missouri on their vacation? The answer to that question would haunt me for years to come. Any ransom demands? That's what makes this even more disturbing, Agent Cross. No ransom calls, no demands, nothing. It's been over 24 hours since they disappeared, and we haven't heard anything from whoever took them. In my experience, that usually means one of two things. Either the victims are already dead, or they're being held for reasons that have nothing to do with money. And given the level of planning we've uncovered, I'm starting to suspect it's the latter, which terrifies me more than I can express. The drive to Millfield took me through some of Colorado's most beautiful but treacherous mountain country. Winding roads carved into cliffsides, deep valleys that seemed to swallow sound, and vast wilderness areas where someone could hide almost anything and never be found. The further I drove from civilization, the more I understood why this location had been chosen for whatever was happening to the Whitlocks. But I also began to notice things that would later prove significant. Subtle signs of surveillance along the route, positions where vehicles could observe traffic without being seen, communication equipment hidden among the trees. As I navigated the serpentine mountain roads, I found myself thinking about the psychology of predators who target elderly victims. Unlike crimes against younger victims, which are often motivated by robbery, sexual assault, or other immediate gratifications, crimes against the elderly usually involve different motivations. The perceived helplessness of the victims, the satisfaction of exerting complete power over those who can't fight back, or sometimes the systematic exploitation of individuals whose society has essentially forgotten about. But the level of planning described by Commander Fleming suggested something even more sinister. Predators who derived as much satisfaction from the psychological aspects of the hunt as from whatever they planned to do with their captured prey. But there was something else troubling me as I drove through those isolated mountains. Every few miles, I would pass what appeared to be maintenance or utility vehicles parked at scenic overlooks or rest areas. The drivers always looked away when I passed, and I noticed that the vehicles had unusually sophisticated antenna arrays for routine maintenance work. Someone was coordinating activities in these mountains, and they had the resources to maintain professional-level communications and surveillance networks. This wasn't the work of isolated criminals. This was organized, well-funded, and sophisticated in ways that made my blood run cold. Millfield itself was a picturesque mountain town that looked like it had been designed for postcards and tourism brochures. Victorian-era buildings housed quaint shops and restaurants. Tree-lined streets were perfect for evening strolls, and the surrounding mountains provided a dramatic backdrop that drew photographers from around the world. But beneath the scenic charm, there was an underlying tension that I could feel as soon as I arrived. The way people looked at strangers, the way conversations stopped when outsiders approached, the subtle signs of a community that was hiding something important. The locals I spoke with during my initial reconnaissance described a community that prided itself on being safe and welcoming to tourists. Crime was virtually non-existent. Violent crime was unheard of, and the biggest law enforcement challenges usually involved drunk tourists or the occasional domestic dispute. But as I talked to more people, I began to notice inconsistencies in their stories, gaps in timelines, reluctance to discuss certain topics, and a strange uniformity in their responses that suggested they had been coached on what to say to law enforcement. "We've never had anything like this happen here," Martha Cordelia, the owner of the local diner, told me when I stopped for lunch. But her eyes darted nervously around the restaurant as she spoke, and I noticed that she kept glancing toward a table in the corner, where a man in an expensive suit was eating alone while typing on a laptop. People come here to get away from the violence and crime of the big cities. The fact that someone could be out there in our woods, watching and waiting to hurt innocent people, makes me wonder if anywhere is safe anymore. But when I asked her about the man in the suit, her demeanor changed immediately. She became defensive, claimed he was just a businessman passing through, and quickly excused herself to attend to other customers. When I tried to approach the man directly, he closed his laptop, left money on the table, and walked out of the restaurant without making eye contact. I followed him outside, but he had vanished as if he had never been there. His rental car, a black sedan with tinted windows and government plates, was gone, leaving only the faint smell of expensive cologne and the unsettling feeling that I was being watched by invisible eyes. The Millfield Mountain Inn was a beautifully restored Victorian mansion that had been converted into a bed and breakfast, the kind of place that appeared in travel magazines and romantic getaway advertisements. Wraparound porches, gingerbread trim, and manicured gardens created the perfect atmosphere for couples seeking a peaceful retreat from the stresses of modern life. But the crime scene tape across the front entrance and the cluster of law enforcement vehicles in the parking lot shattered the peaceful illusion, transforming the charming inn into something that looked more like a fortress under siege. Commander Fleming met me at the front steps, and I could see that the strain of the past 24 hours had aged him years. He was a tall man in his 50s, with graying hair and the steady demeanor of someone who had spent decades dealing with crisis situations. But there was something in his eyes that suggested this case was testing even his considerable experience. A haunted look that I would later recognize in my own reflection, the look of someone who has seen evidence of evil so profound that it challenges their basic understanding of human nature. "Agent Cross, thank you for coming so quickly," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was almost desperate in its intensity. "I have to warn you. What we found in that room and in the surrounding area is going to stick with you for the rest of your life. These people went through something that I can't even describe in professional terms. Whoever did this wanted them to experience absolute terror before they were taken, and they documented every moment of it with the precision of artists creating a masterpiece." He led me through the inn's elegant lobby, past antique furniture and oil paintings that spoke of a more genteel era when violence was something that happened to other people in distant places. The inn's owner, a nervous woman named Serafina Walsh, hovered nearby, wringing her hands and repeatedly apologizing as if the violence that had occurred in her establishment was somehow her fault. But I noticed that her apologies seemed rehearsed, and when she thought no one was looking, she would glance toward the staircase with an expression that looked more like anticipation than grief. "They seem like such a lovely couple," she kept saying, but her voice lacked genuine emotion. They were so excited about their retirement trip, so happy to be spending time together. They didn't deserve what happened to them. No one deserves that kind of treatment. But when I asked her for specific details about the Whitlocks' behavior, Their conversations or their daily routines, she claimed to remember very little, despite having told other officers that she had spent considerable time talking with them about their travel plans. Room 237 was on the second floor, overlooking the inn's gardens and the mountains beyond. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the perfect room for a romantic getaway. Spacious, elegantly furnished, with a private balcony that offered stunning views of the surrounding wilderness. But the crime scene inside transformed it into something from a nightmare. A tableau of violence so carefully orchestrated that it felt more like a theatrical production than a random criminal act. Blood spatter on the floral wallpaper told the story of violence that had erupted suddenly, but had been carefully controlled and directed. Furniture was overturned in specific patterns that suggested the attackers had been following a predetermined plan rather than simply overwhelming their victims through brute force. The contents of suitcases were scattered across the floor, but not randomly. Personal items had been arranged in deliberate patterns that seemed designed to maximize the psychological impact on the victims who would have been forced to watch their most treasured possessions being violated and destroyed. But it was the photographic evidence we found that truly disturbed me. Hidden cameras had been installed throughout the room, so well concealed that even our forensics team had difficulty locating them. These cameras had recorded everything that happened in the room for the previous 3 days, creating a detailed record of the Whitlocks' final hours of freedom. The recordings, which I've seen only once and refused to watch again, showed the systematic psychological torture of 2 innocent people who had never harmed anyone in their long lives. The blood belongs to both victims, Commander Fleming explained as we examined the scene, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Whitlock appears to have fought back initially. There are defensive wounds consistent with his blood near the door, but the pattern suggests he was quickly overwhelmed and restrained, forced to watch while they terrorized his wife. Mrs. Whitlock's blood is concentrated near the bed, but not in patterns consistent with fatal injuries. They were keeping her alive, conscious, and aware of everything that was happening to her husband. Time frame? Based on when they were last seen in the dining room and when housekeeping discovered the scene, we're looking at a window between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. But the blood evidence, the condition of the room, and the recording equipment suggest they were held here for several hours, possibly the entire night, before being transported elsewhere. They weren't killed here, Agent Cross. They were processed here, prepared for whatever came next. Any witnesses? That's part of what's so disturbing about this case, Fleming replied, his eyes not meeting mine. The inn only had 3 other occupied rooms that night, and none of the guests reported hearing anything unusual. But Agent Cross, we've tested the acoustics of this building. Even with the solid construction and thick walls, screams from this room should have been audible throughout the second floor. Either the Whitlocks were prevented from crying out through methods I don't want to contemplate, or the other guests are lying about what they heard. The forensics team was still processing evidence, but preliminary findings painted a picture so horrifying that several team members had requested transfers to other cases. The attackers had come prepared with professional-grade restraints, medical supplies for keeping victims conscious but compliant, and sophisticated communication equipment for coordinating with Confederates at remote locations. This wasn't random violence. It was a carefully planned operation conducted by people who had extensive experience in capturing, transporting, and processing human victims for purposes that none of us wanted to consider. The restraints were military-grade, the lead forensics technician explained, his hands shaking as he showed me the evidence. The kind used for prisoner transport in combat situations. The medical supplies include drugs that would keep victims conscious but unable to resist effectively. And the communication equipment suggests they were in contact with a larger organization throughout the operation. This was a team effort, Agent Cross, coordinated by people with substantial resources and professional training. Any indication of sexual assault? Not in the traditional sense, but there are signs that the victims were stripped, examined, and prepared for transport to another location. It's like they were being processed for delivery to someone else, evaluated for specific criteria that we can't identify from the physical evidence. The psychological preparation was extensive. They were terrorized systematically, broken down mentally, and conditioned to comply with whatever instructions they were given. In the woods behind the inn, concealed in a photographer's blind constructed from natural materials and sophisticated camouflage netting, we found surveillance equipment that belonged in a professional intelligence operation rather than a criminal enterprise. The blind was virtually invisible from any angle unless you knew exactly where to look. Constructed by someone with extensive military or intelligence training who understood how to create observation posts that could remain undetected for extended periods. The equipment is military grade, professional level, the forensics photographer explained. As we examined the cache, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. Digital cameras with telephoto lenses, night vision capability, motion sensors, satellite communication equipment, even weather monitoring devices. This isn't amateur stalking. This is the kind of surveillance operation that intelligence agencies conduct against high-value targets in foreign countries. The photographs themselves were even more disturbing than the sophisticated equipment used to take them. Hundreds of images documented the Whitlocks' daily routines with obsessive detail, but they weren't simple surveillance photos. They were artistic compositions, carefully framed and lit, showing the couple in intimate, vulnerable moments when they believed they were safe and unobserved. Photos of them eating breakfast on their private balcony, walking hand in hand through the inn's gardens, sharing quiet conversations in their room as they planned the next day's activities. But most disturbing were the final photos. Images taken through the room's window during the assault, capturing the victim's terror and confusion in clinical detail, while maintaining the same artistic composition as the earlier surveillance images. The photographer had documented their abduction with the same methodical precision and aesthetic sensibility they had used to stalk them, as if the violence was simply the natural conclusion of an artistic project that had been months in the planning. Whoever did this didn't just want to capture and transport these people, I observed while studying the evidence, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. They wanted to create a permanent record of every aspect of their victimization, from the initial surveillance through the final capture. This isn't just about the crime itself. It's about preserving and perhaps sharing the complete experience of destroying these people's lives. Why would someone want to document something like this with such care and artistic attention? In my experience, there are only a few reasons people create such detailed records of their crimes, I replied, though the implications of my own words made me feel sick. Sometimes it's for legal protection, proof that they followed specific instructions from whoever hired them. Sometimes it's for sale to others with similar interests, people willing to pay premium prices for high-quality documentation of real suffering. And sometimes it's because the documentation itself is the primary product they're selling, more valuable than the victims themselves. But as I studied the photographs more carefully, I began to notice subtle details that suggested an even more disturbing possibility. Some of the images showed the Whitlocks in situations and locations that they had never actually visited, according to their documented itinerary. Photos of them at restaurants they had never eaten at, scenic overlooks they had never seen, even what appeared to be their own home in Kansas City taken from impossible angles and perspectives. Someone had been manufacturing false evidence of the Whitlocks' activities, creating a fictional narrative of their final days that bore only a passing resemblance to reality. The investigation expanded rapidly as we began tracing the Whitlocks' movements leading up to their disappearance. But what we discovered suggested that their abduction was not the culmination of a carefully orchestrated plan. It was simply one step in a much larger operation that had been monitoring and manipulating their lives for months, possibly years. Thaddeus and Evangeline Whitlock had been married for 48 years and had recently retired from successful careers. He as a bank manager with access to substantial financial resources. She as a high school principal who had served on numerous community boards and had extensive knowledge of local social services and vulnerable populations. They had no criminal connections, no significant debts, and no known enemies. But they did have something that made them attractive to certain types of predators: substantial assets, predictable routines, and a social circle that would notice their disappearance, but might not have the resources to launch an intensive investigation. Their vacation itinerary, which we obtained from their family, revealed they had planned a leisurely 3-week driving tour through Colorado, staying at small-town bed and breakfasts, and taking scenic routes through the mountains. It was the kind of trip that represented the American dream of retirement. The freedom to explore the country at your own pace, staying in charming accommodations and meeting interesting people along the way. But as we traced their route more carefully, we discovered that their itinerary had been subtly modified during their trip, with suggestions from helpful locals and inn owners who directed them toward increasingly isolated locations. As we contacted the places they had stayed and the people they had encountered, a disturbing pattern emerged that suggested their entire vacation had been orchestrated by outside forces. Every location they had visited during their trip had been the site of unusual incidents in the weeks leading up to their arrival. Break-ins at hotels where nothing was stolen but security systems were mysteriously disabled. Reports of suspicious individuals asking detailed questions about elderly guests and their travel plans. Unexplained technical problems with communication systems that would have prevented victims from calling for help. Someone had been preparing a route for them across multiple states, I reported to SAC Patricia Whitmore during my evening briefing, my voice betraying the exhaustion and growing horror I felt as the scope of the operation became clear. This wasn't opportunistic predation. The Whitlocks were specifically targeted months ago, and an entire network of people guided them along a predetermined path that led directly to their capture. Every person they trusted, every recommendation they followed, every decision they thought they were making independently was actually part of a plan designed by people who viewed them as nothing more than valuable assets to be harvested. Any idea why they were chosen specifically? That's what's so disturbing about this case, ma'am. On the surface, they fit a profile that would make them attractive to various types of predators: physically vulnerable, financially secure, socially isolated during travel, following predictable routines. But the level of planning and resources involved suggests this is part of something much larger than simple opportunistic crime. Someone invested considerable time, money, and personnel in capturing these specific individuals, which suggests they have value beyond their immediate assets. But it was the financial investigation that revealed the true scope of what we were dealing with. The Whitlocks had been making unusual financial transactions for months before their vacation, withdrawing cash in amounts that were just below federal reporting requirements and transferring money to accounts that they claimed were for travel expenses, but which led to offshore banking systems that specialized in hiding the sources and destinations of large financial transactions. When we examined their bank records more carefully, we discovered that they had been receiving subtle financial incentives to make specific travel choices, discounts on accommodations that were only available if they stayed at certain locations, travel insurance policies that required them to follow predetermined routes, even gasoline credit card promotions that encouraged them to stop at specific service stations along their journey. Someone had been using financial manipulation to guide their movements for months, creating a paper trail that would make it appear they had voluntarily participated in whatever ultimately happened to them. The financial manipulation is sophisticated and extensive. Our financial crimes specialist reported during a task force briefing that left everyone in the room feeling sick. The Whitlocks weren't just targeted for abduction, they were groomed for months, conditioned to follow specific behavioral patterns that would make them ideal victims. Someone invested substantial resources in preparing them psychologically and financially for whatever fate awaited them, using techniques that are consistent with human trafficking operations that serve extremely wealthy clients. But it was the discovery we made in the third week of the investigation that revealed the true horror of what the Whitlocks had encountered. A hiker in a remote area of Wyoming discovered what appeared to be a hastily buried cache of personal belongings, but not just random items stolen from victims. These were carefully curated collections: personal photographs, jewelry with sentimental value, handwritten letters, and documents that would have deep emotional significance to the original owners. Someone had been collecting trophies not just from the Whitlocks, but from dozens of other victims whose disappearances had never been connected to a larger pattern. The location of the cache was significant in ways that made our investigation team physically ill. It was in the middle of a vast wilderness area, accessible only by helicopter or specialized off-road vehicles, in a region that was known to local hunters and outdoor enthusiasts as a place where people went to disappear permanently. But more importantly, it was located at the center of a pattern of disappearances that stretched back over 15 years. Missing persons cases that had been classified as accidental deaths, suicides, or voluntary disappearances, but which now appeared to be the work of a systematic operation that had been harvesting victims for over a decade. Hidden among the personal belongings, wrapped in waterproof materials and sealed in military-grade containers, we found detailed documentation of a criminal enterprise that operated with the efficiency of a legitimate business and the resources of a government agency. Client lists, service menus, pricing structures, and operational protocols for the systematic capture, processing, and disposal of human victims who had been selected based on specific criteria that made them ideal for the entertainment of wealthy clients who paid premium prices for access to helpless captives. This device was feeding real-time location and biometric data to a central coordination system, our technical specialist explained as we examined GPS tracking devices that had been surgically implanted in multiple victims. It's military-grade equipment, the kind used for monitoring high-value assets in combat zones. Someone with access to advanced surveillance technology has been treating these people like livestock, tracking their movements, monitoring their health, and coordinating their capture with precision that would be impressive if it weren't so absolutely horrifying. But the GPS data revealed something even more disturbing than systematic surveillance. It showed that many of the tracked individuals had continued transmitting signals for months after their supposed deaths or disappearances, indicating that they were being held at a central location where their vital signs and locations were continuously monitored. The final transmission coordinates led to a location in the Wyoming wilderness that appeared to be a large ranch or compound. But satellite imagery showed structures and activities that were inconsistent with legitimate agricultural or recreational operations. "We need to get eyes on that location immediately," I told the expanded task force during our emergency briefing. If the GPS data is accurate, we're looking at a facility that may be holding dozens of victims who have been declared dead but are actually being held captive. This isn't just about the Whitlocks anymore. We may be looking at the largest human trafficking operation in U.S. history. The ranch was located on over 2,000 acres of remote Wyoming wilderness, officially owned by a consortium of shell corporations with connections to offshore banking systems and international business networks that specialized in facilitating activities that required absolute privacy and legal protection. The property was surrounded by federal wilderness areas and private ranches owned by wealthy individuals who valued privacy above all else, creating a buffer zone where unusual activities could be conducted without observation or interference from local law enforcement. Satellite imagery revealed a compound that looked more like a military installation than a recreational facility. Multiple buildings constructed with reinforced concrete and steel, underground structures that were invisible from aerial surveillance, vehicle compounds that could accommodate dozens of cars and trucks, helicopter landing facilities that could handle aircraft of various sizes, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be crematorium facilities and waste disposal systems that were far more extensive than any legitimate operation would require. This isn't just a criminal enterprise, I observed, while studying the aerial photographs with growing horror. This is a business operation that has been designed to process large numbers of people with complete efficiency and absolute security. The infrastructure investment alone represents millions of dollars, which means we're dealing with individuals or organizations that have virtually unlimited financial resources and political connections that allow them to operate without interference from law enforcement. Research into the ownership structure revealed a web of international corporations, government contractors, and private military companies that made it virtually impossible to identify the actual individuals responsible for funding and operating the facility. But certain patterns emerged that suggested connections to intelligence agencies, military contractors, and wealthy private individuals who had the resources and political connections necessary to maintain such an operation without attracting unwanted attention. Getting approval for a raid on the compound required careful coordination with federal prosecutors, international law enforcement agencies, and military units that specialized in operations against heavily defended targets. The remote location, unknown number of potential victims and perpetrators, and sophisticated security measures made the operation extremely dangerous and complex. We couldn't afford to alert the operators to our presence, but we also couldn't delay too long if there were living victims being held at the facility. But it was what we discovered during the planning phase that truly revealed the scope of what we were dealing with. Intelligence gathered from various sources suggested that the compound was just one node in an international network of facilities that provided specialized services to wealthy clients who were willing to pay premium prices for experiences that were unavailable through legitimate channels. Human trafficking, systematic abuse, psychological experimentation, and disposal services for people who had become inconvenient or dangerous to powerful individuals. The raid was scheduled for dawn on December 15, 2018, exactly 3 weeks after the Whitlock's disappearance, but it would be coordinated with simultaneous operations at facilities in Montana, Nevada, and New Mexico that intelligence suggested were part of the same network. Federal agents from multiple agencies, including the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team, military special operations units, and international law enforcement personnel, converged on multiple locations in what became one of the largest coordinated law enforcement operations in modern history. What we found when we breached the compound's defenses was worse than anything we had imagined, but it also revealed the true scope of the evil that the Whitlocks had encountered. The facility contained multiple buildings designed for the systematic imprisonment, psychological manipulation, and physical conditioning of kidnapped victims, complete with medical facilities for maintaining captives in specific physical and mental states, recording studios for documenting their degradation, and disposal systems for eliminating evidence when clients had finished with their victims. The main lodge served as both a reception area for clients and a monitoring center where victim activities could be observed and recorded in real time. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from cameras installed throughout the compound, allowing observers to select victims based on their personal preferences and monitor their conditioning progress. The setup was professional, expensive, and designed for long-term operations that would serve an international clientele of wealthy individuals who paid substantial fees for access to helpless human beings. But it was the administrative areas that revealed the true horror of what we had discovered. Files and records documented a systematic business that had been operating for over 15 years, processing hundreds of victims and generating tens of millions of dollars in profits through services that ranged from simple imprisonment and psychological abuse to specialized conditioning programs that prepared victims for specific roles in satisfying client fantasies. The operation had international connections, government protection, and client lists that included some of the most powerful and wealthy individuals in the world. In the underground detention areas, we found over 60 living victims, including the Whitlocks, who had been subjected to months or years of systematic psychological conditioning that had broken their spirits and made them completely dependent on their captors for basic survival. The physical conditions were sterile and medically supervised, but the psychological damage was extensive and in many cases appeared to be irreversible. These people had been systematically dehumanized, trained to view themselves as property rather than human beings, and conditioned to serve whatever purposes their clients might require. Thaddeus Whitlock was barely recognizable as the confident retired bank manager who had set out on a vacation with his beloved wife. He had lost significant weight, showed signs of systematic psychological conditioning that had destroyed his sense of personal identity, and responded only to direct commands from authority figures. His eyes were empty, devoid of the spark of independence and dignity that characterizes free human beings. He had been processed, broken down, and rebuilt as something that existed solely to serve the pleasure of others. Evangeline Whitlock was in similar condition, but her conditioning had been even more extensive and specialized. She had been subjected to psychological manipulation techniques that had eliminated her ability to make independent decisions or form emotional attachments to anyone except her assigned handlers. She sat quietly when we found her, showing no recognition of the rescue team members or any understanding that her situation had changed. She had been transformed from a loving wife and dedicated educator into something that was barely human. They told us that our families had forgotten about us, she said in a flat, emotionless voice when the medical team tried to explain that they were being rescued. They showed us proof that no one was looking for us anymore, that we had been declared dead and our assets had been distributed to our heirs. They explained that we belonged to them now, that our purpose was to serve clients who had paid substantial fees for access to us. They were very kind about explaining our new situation. The medical team that responded to the scene reported that all of the survivors showed signs of systematic psychological conditioning that had been designed not just to make them compliant, but to fundamentally alter their sense of identity and purpose. They had been kept in conditions that were physically comfortable, but psychologically devastating, treated well in terms of basic needs, but subjected to constant manipulation that convinced them they were no longer human beings with rights and dignity, but rather assets that existed to generate revenue for their owners. The psychological conditioning is extensive and appears to have been designed by professionals with advanced training in behavioral modification. Dr. Cordelia Blackthorne, the trauma specialist assigned to treat the survivors, reported. These people have been subjected to sophisticated brainwashing techniques that were designed to eliminate their sense of personal identity and replace it with complete dependence on their captors. The process appears to have been gradual, systematic, and reinforced through methods that are consistent with advanced psychological warfare techniques developed by intelligence agencies. But it was the evidence we collected from the compound's administrative areas that revealed the full scope of the criminal enterprise and its connections to powerful individuals and organizations throughout the world. Detailed records documented not just the systematic abuse of hundreds of victims, but the involvement of government officials, corporate executives, entertainment industry figures, and other wealthy individuals who had paid substantial fees for access to specific victims or specialized services. The client lists read like a directory of international power and influence. Politicians from multiple countries, CEOs of major corporations, celebrities whose public images were built on humanitarian advocacy, religious leaders who preached moral values while privately engaging in activities that violated every principle they claimed to represent. These weren't isolated criminals or mentally disturbed individuals. They were people who moved in the highest circles of society while using their wealth and influence to participate in systematic human trafficking and abuse. This operation wasn't just about providing victims to wealthy clients, I observed while reviewing the evidence, feeling a growing sense of horror at the scope of what we had uncovered. This was a systematic blackmail and control operation that used compromising evidence to manipulate powerful individuals throughout the world. They weren't just selling access to victims, they were creating leverage over people who control major corporations, government agencies, and international organizations. The financial records showed that the operation had generated over $50 million in direct revenue over its 15-year history. But the real value lay in the control it exercised over clients who had been recorded participating in activities that would destroy their careers, their families, and their freedom if the evidence were ever made public. The operation had essentially created a network of powerful individuals who were completely dependent on its continued secrecy and protection. The network's leader was identified as Dr. Marcus Grimwood, a former military psychologist who had been involved in developing psychological conditioning techniques for intelligence agencies before being discharged for conducting unauthorized experiments on prisoners and detainees. He had spent years developing and refining methods for systematic psychological manipulation and control, knowledge that he had monetized through his criminal operation while maintaining connections to government agencies and international organizations that found his techniques useful for their own purposes. Dr. Grimwood viewed this as a legitimate research operation that happened to generate substantial profits, Agent Stern explained, after conducting extensive interviews with him following his arrest. He had convinced himself that he was advancing human knowledge about psychological conditioning and control, while providing valuable services to clients who were willing to pay premium prices for experiences that couldn't be obtained through conventional channels. To him, the victims weren't human beings. They were research subjects and entertainment assets that served important purposes in his grand experiment. But perhaps most disturbing was Grimwood's complete lack of recognition that his victims were human beings deserving of basic dignity and respect. During his interrogation, he discussed his operations in purely clinical terms, describing the systematic destruction of human personalities as if he were discussing agricultural techniques or manufacturing processes. He showed detailed charts and graphs documenting the psychological breakdown of his victims, proud of his ability to reduce complex human beings to controllable assets within predetermined timeframes. These individuals were living unproductive lives anyway, he said, when confronted with evidence of his crimes, his voice carrying the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to slow students. Retirement is simply a biological and economic inefficiency, people consuming resources without generating corresponding value. We provided them with purpose by making them useful components in important research, while simultaneously generating revenue that funded further advancement of psychological science. Our clients paid premium prices because they understood the value of participating in groundbreaking research. You systematically destroyed the minds and identities of innocent people for money, I responded, struggling to maintain professional objectivity in the face of such casual dehumanization. We operated a successful research enterprise that identified and efficiently utilized undervalued human resources, he replied with the calm confidence of someone who had rationalized his actions over many years. The subjects were maintained in optimal physical condition, while their psychological responses were studied and documented. The data we collected will advance human understanding of behavioral modification in ways that conventional research could never achieve. Our clients weren't just purchasing entertainment experiences. They were contributing to scientific advancement while enjoying the satisfaction of participating in important work. What you accomplished was the systematic torture and dehumanization of hundreds of innocent people. What we accomplished was the development of the most advanced psychological conditioning techniques in human history, with practical applications for education, therapy, criminal rehabilitation, and social control. The temporary discomfort experienced by our research subjects was insignificant compared to the long-term benefits that our discoveries will provide to human civilization. History will vindicate our methods when the full value of our research becomes apparent. The investigation into the network's client base revealed connections that reached into the highest levels of government, corporate leadership, and international organizations. Financial records obtained through federal warrants and international cooperation agreements showed payments totaling hundreds of millions of dollars, flowing from accounts belonging to individuals whose names appeared regularly in newspapers, whose decisions affected the lives of millions of people, and whose public images were built on reputations for moral leadership and humanitarian concern. These aren't mentally ill individuals who lost control of their impulses, Federal Prosecutor Silas Ashworth explained during the coordination meetings for what would become the largest prosecution in modern history. These are calculating criminals who use their wealth, influence, and political connections to participate in systematic human trafficking while maintaining public reputations as pillars of society. They knew exactly what they were purchasing, and they paid premium prices because they wanted access to victims who had been completely broken and conditioned for their entertainment. The client list included names that would shock the public if they were ever released: senators and congressmen from both major political parties, Supreme Court justices, cabinet members from multiple presidential administrations, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, entertainment industry figures whose movies and television shows promoted messages of human dignity and social justice, religious leaders who preached moral values while privately engaging in activities that violated every principle they claimed to represent. The most disturbing aspect of this case is discovering the extent to which our society's leadership has been compromised by their participation in systematic evil, I reflected during one of the task force briefings, feeling a growing sense of despair about the nature of power and corruption in America. These aren't isolated incidents of moral failure. They represent a systematic culture of exploitation that has infected the highest levels of our institutions. We're not just investigating crimes, we're uncovering evidence that our entire system of government and social control has been corrupted by people who view other human beings as consumable resources. Many of the clients had participated not just once, but repeatedly over the 15-year period that the network operated. Some had developed preferences for specific types of victims or particular conditioning protocols. Others had requested custom psychological manipulation, programs that were designed to create victims who would satisfy their specific fantasies of power and control. The record showed a systematic marketplace for human suffering that operated with the efficiency of any other luxury service industry. The investigation also revealed that the Wyoming compound was just one component of an international network of facilities that provided similar services in countries where law enforcement oversight was minimal and government officials could be easily bribed or blackmailed into providing protection. American clients traveled to facilities in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America, while international clients came to American facilities that offered specialized services not available elsewhere. We're dealing with a global marketplace for human trafficking that generates billions of dollars in annual revenue while serving clients who have the resources to purchase complete immunity from legal consequences, I reported during an Interpol briefing on international cooperation in dismantling the network. The operation uses sophisticated financial systems, political protection, and advanced psychological techniques to maintain a steady supply of victims while ensuring that clients can participate without fear of exposure or prosecution. But it was the discovery we made in the compound's research facilities that revealed the true scope of Grimwood's ambitions and the danger his work represented to human civilization. Hidden laboratories contained evidence of experiments designed to develop chemical and technological methods for controlling human behavior on a massive scale. Research into airborne drugs that could make entire populations susceptible to manipulation, subliminal messaging systems that could be integrated into mass media and communication networks, and even genetic modification techniques designed to create human beings who were biologically programmed for compliance and servitude. Dr. Grimwood wasn't just operating a criminal enterprise, Dr. Blackthorne reported after examining the research facilities. He was developing tools for totalitarian control that could be used to enslave entire populations. The psychological conditioning techniques he developed for individual victims were prototypes for systems designed to control millions of people simultaneously. We are looking at research that could fundamentally alter the nature of human freedom and dignity if it were ever implemented on a larger scale. The trials that followed the arrests were conducted largely in secret due to national security concerns and the sensitive nature of the evidence. Many of the most prominent clients avoided public prosecution through plea agreements that required them to provide information about other criminal networks and surrender substantial assets to victim compensation funds. But the evidence presented during the classified proceedings revealed the extent to which American society had been infiltrated by individuals who viewed their fellow citizens as expendable resources to be exploited for personal gratification. Dr. Grimwood was ultimately convicted on over 400 counts of kidnapping, human trafficking, psychological torture, and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death and executed 18 months later, but not before providing extensive testimony about the international networks and government connections that had allowed his operation to function without interference. His execution was carried out in secret, and the details of his final statements were classified at the highest levels of government. Many of his direct associates received life sentences without the possibility of parole, though several died under mysterious circumstances while awaiting trial or serving their sentences. The client prosecutions resulted in dozens of plea agreements, resignations from high-level government positions, and the quiet dissolution of several major corporations whose leadership had been compromised by their participation in the network. The hardest part of this entire investigation was maintaining faith in the possibility of justice when we discovered how extensively our institutions had been corrupted, Prosecutor Ashworth told me after the final trials concluded. We weren't just prosecuting individual criminals. We were confronting a systematic culture of exploitation that had infected the highest levels of American society. The fact that we were able to secure any convictions at all is remarkable, given the political and financial resources that were mobilized to protect the perpetrators. Thaddeus and Evangeline Whitlock survived their ordeal in the physical sense, but the psychological damage from their months of systematic conditioning left them unable to return to any semblance of their previous lives. The advanced behavioral modification techniques they had endured were designed to be irreversible, creating permanent changes in their brain chemistry and psychological responses that made independent living impossible. They were transferred to a specialized treatment facility that had been established specifically for victims of systematic psychological abuse, equipped with security measures designed to protect residents from further exploitation, while providing intensive therapy designed to restore some measure of human dignity and psychological autonomy. But the prognosis was grim. The conditioning they had endured was so extensive and sophisticated that recovery might be impossible. They don't remember being married to each other, their daughter, Sarah Whitlock Montgomery, told me during a visit 6 months after the rescue. They don't remember their children, their careers, or their life together. The people who did this to them didn't just imprison their bodies. They murdered their identities and replaced them with something that barely qualifies as human. We got their bodies back, but the people we loved are gone forever. The Whitlock's son, Michael, struggled with his own psychological trauma as a result of what happened to his parents and what the investigation had revealed about the nature of evil in American society. I keep thinking about the fact that the people who did this to my parents were respected members of society. People we trusted, people we voted for, people whose movies we watched and whose products we bought. He told me, "How do you maintain faith in civilization when you discover that the people who control it view other human beings as consumable entertainment?" But it was what happened 6 months after the trials concluded that truly revealed the scope of what we were dealing with and the extent to which powerful forces were committed to protecting the network's secrets. Several key witnesses died under suspicious circumstances. Evidence was destroyed in fires and security breaches that appeared to be coordinated, and family members of victims began receiving threats that suggested the network's influence extended far beyond what we had been able to prosecute. The case officially closed with Grimwood's execution and the sentencing of his direct associates. But I knew that we had only exposed a small fraction of a criminal enterprise that had roots throughout American society and international connections that made complete elimination impossible. Every missing persons report involving vulnerable individuals now carried the possibility that we were dealing with a network that had learned from our investigation and adapted its methods to avoid future detection. The demand for victims that Grimwood's network served hasn't disappeared, Agent Stern observed during our final case review. The clients are still out there, the financial resources are still available, and the corruption that allowed the network to operate for 15 years without detection is still embedded in our institutions. We disrupted one operation, but the market forces that created it are still active. But it was the phone call I received 3 months after the case officially closed that confirmed my worst fears about the true scope of what we were dealing with. I was working late in my office when my phone rang at exactly 2:22 a.m., the same time that Commander Fleming had called to report the Whitlock's disappearance. The voice on the other end was electronically disguised, but the message was clear and terrifying. "Agent Cross, you performed admirably in dismantling Dr. Grimwood's operation, but you should understand that his work was just one component of a much larger enterprise. The research he conducted, the techniques he developed, and the networks he established have been preserved and will continue under new management. The clients you identified represent only a small fraction of the individuals who require the services we provide." "Who is this?" I demanded, though I already knew that the caller would not provide any identifying information. "Someone who appreciates your dedication to justice, but wants you to understand the futility of your efforts. The network you discovered has been operating in various forms for over a century, serving clients whose wealth and influence allow them to indulge interests that ordinary people would find incomprehensible. Dr. Grimwood was talented but ultimately dispensable. His successors are more careful, better connected, and completely beyond your reach. If you think we're going to stop investigating, We don't expect you to stop, Agent Cross. We expect you to understand the limitations of your authority and the consequences of exceeding those limitations. Your investigation has already revealed more than certain parties find acceptable. Future discoveries might prove hazardous to your health and the safety of your family. The line went dead, but the caller's words echoed in my mind for hours afterward. I had been naive to think that arresting Grimwood and prosecuting his associates would end the network's operations. We had disrupted one component of a criminal enterprise that was larger, older, and more deeply embedded in American society than I had imagined possible. Over the following months, I began to notice subtle changes in my work environment and personal life that suggested I was under constant surveillance. My cases were reassigned without explanation, my security clearances were mysteriously delayed for renewal, and my requests for information about ongoing investigations into related networks were denied without justification. It became clear that powerful forces were working to limit my involvement in any activities that might threaten the network's continued operations. But it was the discovery I made while reviewing old case files that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy I had stumbled into. Buried in decades of missing persons reports, unsolved murders, and unexplained disappearances was a pattern that stretched back to the 1950s. Systematic targeting of vulnerable individuals whose disappearances could be explained as accidents, suicides, or voluntary departures from society. The network hadn't been operating for 15 years. It had been harvesting victims for over 70 years, adapting its methods to changing social conditions while maintaining connections to the highest levels of government and corporate power. The evidence was subtle but consistent. Missing persons cases that were closed prematurely despite incomplete investigations, witness testimony that was ignored or suppressed, physical evidence that disappeared from storage facilities, and family members who were discouraged from pursuing further investigation through methods that ranged from financial incentives to outright intimidation. Someone had been using law enforcement agencies, government resources, and media influence to facilitate the systematic disappearance of American citizens for nearly 3/4 of a century. 6 months after my investigation officially ended, I received a package at my home address with no return address or identifying information. Inside was a photograph of my teenage daughter walking to school, taken from a position that would have required the photographer to be in my neighbor's backyard during the early morning hours when she left for her bus stop. There was no note or message, just the photograph and the clear implication that my family's safety depended on my continued cooperation with forces that remained invisible but omnipresent. I tried to report the incident to local law enforcement and FBI security personnel, but my concerns were dismissed as paranoid delusions resulting from stress related to the Whitlock investigation. My requests for protective surveillance were denied, my reports were filed but never investigated, and I was strongly encouraged to take extended leave for psychological evaluation and treatment. It became clear that the network's influence extended into law enforcement agencies at every level, including the FBI itself. The final confirmation of my worst fears came when I discovered that key evidence from the Wyoming compound had been reclassified at levels that prevented even senior FBI officials from accessing it. Video recordings of client activities, financial records documenting payments from prominent individuals, and research files detailing psychological conditioning techniques had all been moved to facilities controlled by intelligence agencies that operated beyond congressional oversight or judicial review. The evidence that could have exposed the full scope of the network's operations and its connections to powerful individuals had been effectively buried. A year after the Whitlock case officially closed, I was transferred to a desk job investigating insurance fraud in a small field office in Montana. My security clearances were revoked, my access to federal databases was restricted, and my personnel file was flagged with notations that effectively ended any possibility of advancement or assignment to significant investigations. I had been professionally neutralized, removed from any position where I might be able to continue investigating the network or its activities. But it was the call I received last week that confirmed that my investigation into the Whitlock disappearance had only revealed the surface of something far more horrifying than I had imagined. The voice was different from the previous caller, but the electronic disguise couldn't hide the satisfaction in the speaker's tone. "Agent Cross, we wanted you to know that your parents' recent automobile accident was not random. The brake failure that caused their car to leave the highway was carefully arranged, though it will never be traced to us. This is your final warning about the consequences of continued interest in matters that don't concern you." Demonstrated its ability to eliminate threats while maintaining the appearance of accidents or natural causes. They had the resources, political connections, and technical capabilities necessary to make anyone disappear without leaving evidence of their involvement. As I write this account, I know that I am being watched. Every phone call is monitored, every email is intercepted, every movement is tracked by people who view me as a potential threat to operations that generate billions of dollars in revenue while serving the darkest desires of the world's most powerful individuals. I am a prisoner in my own life, trapped by knowledge that I cannot share without signing my family's death warrant. The Whitlock case taught me that evil in its purest form doesn't announce itself with obvious signs or dramatic gestures. It operates through legitimate institutions, uses respectable people as cover, and maintains itself through a combination of financial incentives, political protection, and systematic intimidation. It convinces good people to look the other way, silences those who ask uncomfortable questions, and presents itself as necessary for the maintenance of social order and economic stability. But most terrifyingly, it has convinced many of its participants that they are serving important purposes: advancing scientific knowledge, providing valuable services, maintaining social stability, or protecting important people from the consequences of their natural urges. The people who kidnapped, conditioned, and exploited the Whitlocks didn't view themselves as criminals. They saw themselves as entrepreneurs, researchers, and service providers who were meeting market demands that would exist regardless of their participation. 3 weeks ago, I received another photograph in the mail. This time, it showed my daughter at her college dormitory, taken through her window as she studied at her desk. The message was clear. The network's reach extended wherever my family went, and their safety depended entirely on my continued silence about what I had discovered during the Whitlock investigation. But there are some truths that demand to be told, regardless of the personal cost. The American public has a right to know that their society has been infiltrated by a criminal network that has been operating for decades, serving clients whose wealth and influence place them above the law, using techniques that threaten the fundamental nature of human dignity and freedom. People deserve to know that their missing family members may not have died in accidents or chosen to disappear. They may have been harvested by a system that views them as renewable resources to be exploited for the entertainment of those who can afford to pay premium prices for access to helpless human beings. And so, I am writing this account knowing that its publication will likely result in my death and possibly the deaths of those I love most in the world. But I cannot live with the knowledge of what I have discovered while remaining silent about the evil that continues to operate in the shadows of our society. The Whitlocks' story is not unique. It is just one example of what happens to thousands of Americans who disappear every year into a system that profits from human suffering while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy and respectability. The network that captured them is still operating, still harvesting victims, still serving clients who pay premium prices for experiences that ordinary people cannot imagine. And tonight, as I finish writing this account, my phone will ring at exactly 2:22 a.m. There will be breathing on the other end, patient and knowing, reminding me that they are always watching, always waiting, always prepared to collect what they consider to be their property. Because in their world, we are all potential victims. We are all Thaddeus and Evangeline Whitlock, living our lives in the illusion of safety and freedom while predators study our routines, evaluate our vulnerabilities, and wait for the perfect moment to drag us into the darkness where human beings become nothing more than assets to be processed, conditioned, and consumed. The case file may say closed, but the nightmare continues. And it will continue until someone with more courage than I possess finds a way to expose the full scope of this evil without becoming its next victim. Until then, we all live in the shadow of the network, pretending that such horrors couldn't happen in America, couldn't happen to people like us, couldn't happen in a society that claims to value human dignity and individual freedom. But they can happen. They are happening. And they will continue to happen as long as we allow ourselves to believe that evil announces itself with obvious signs instead of hiding behind respectable facades and legitimate institutions. The Whitlocks thought they were safe. They thought they were free. They were wrong. And so are we all. As an FBI agent, I thought I understood the minds of killers. I've interviewed dozens of serial murderers, analyzed their patterns, studied their motivations, and learned to navigate the twisted labyrinth of their thoughts. But nothing in my 15-year career with the Bureau prepared me for Mordecai Caldwell and the confessions that would shatter everything I believed about guilt, manipulation, and the terrifying lengths some people will go to protect their darkest secrets. My name is Special Agent Cordelia Blackthorne, and I work out of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, Virginia. I specialize in serial homicide cases and have successfully profiled perpetrators whose crimes span decades and multiple jurisdictions. My success rate in obtaining confessions is among the highest in the Bureau, largely because I've learned to read the subtle psychological tells that reveal when someone is lying, fabricating, or withholding crucial information. On March 15, 2021, I received a call that would change my understanding of criminal psychology forever. The call came from Warden Cornelius Pike at the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana, where the nation's most dangerous criminals serve their sentences in isolation and silence. Agent Blackthorne. Warden Pike's voice carried an edge of bewilderment that I'd never heard from such an experienced corrections officer. I need you to come here immediately. We have a situation with one of our inmates that defies explanation. It involves Mordecai Caldwell and what he's been telling us about murders that were never connected to his case. Mordecai Caldwell had been sentenced to death in 2019 for the brutal murders of 7 people across 3 states: Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. His crimes were methodical, ritualistic, and demonstrated a level of planning and execution that marked him as one of the most dangerous predators I'd ever encountered. The victims were all found in remote locations, arranged in specific patterns that suggested deep psychological significance to the killer. What kind of situation, Warden? Caldwell has been requesting meetings with federal investigators for the past 3 weeks, claiming he wants to confess to additional murders. Not unusual behavior for someone facing execution. They often try to trade information for delays or better conditions. But Agent Blackthorne, the details he's providing, they're accurate down to evidence we never released to the public. Evidence from cases that were never connected to his original prosecution. I felt that familiar tightening in my stomach that accompanies the beginning of a complex case. How many additional murders is he claiming? 43, Agent Blackthorne, spanning 15 states and going back 27 years. But here's what's really disturbing. Some of these murders occurred when Caldwell was provably elsewhere. We have documented alibis placing him hundreds of miles away when several of these crimes were committed. Yet he knows details about the crime scenes that only the actual perpetrator could know. The drive from Quantico to Terre Haute took me through the heartland of America, past small towns and farmland that looked peaceful and innocent under the spring sunshine. But I'd learned long ago that evil doesn't announce itself with obvious signs. It hides in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy until the moment it reveals its true nature. The Federal Correctional Institution at Terre Haute is a fortress of concrete and steel, surrounded by multiple layers of razor wire and electronic surveillance. It houses the worst of the worst. Terrorists, traitors, and serial killers whose crimes were so heinous that society had decided they forfeited their right to exist among the living. Warden Pike met me at the main gate, a tall man in his 60s with graying hair and the measured demeanor of someone who had spent decades managing dangerous men. Agent Blackthorne, I want you to understand something before you meet with Caldwell. In 35 years of corrections work, I've never encountered anything like this. This man knows things he shouldn't know about crimes he couldn't have committed. He led me through a series of security checkpoints, each one more restrictive than the last. The deeper we penetrated into the facility, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to press in around us, and the constant sound of electronic locks and surveillance equipment created a symphony of confinement. Tell me about his behavior since he's been here. Caldwell is what we call a model prisoner. He follows all rules, causes no trouble, spends most of his time reading books on criminology and psychology. He's highly intelligent, tested IQ of 162, and he's been working on what he calls his comprehensive confession. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. We stopped at another checkpoint where guards verified our identities and credentials. He started claiming he had information about unsolved murders across the country. At first, we dismissed it as attention-seeking behavior. But then, he started providing details that made us realize he wasn't just making things up. What kind of details? Specific information about crime scenes that was never released to the public. Details about the victims' personal belongings, their final moments, things that only the killer could have known. But Agent Blackthorne, the most disturbing part is that he's describing murders that occurred when he was demonstrably in other locations. Have you verified his alibis for these other crimes? That's what makes this so impossible. We have employment records, hotel receipts, witness statements, even video surveillance placing him hundreds or thousands of miles away when several of these murders were committed. Yet his knowledge of the crime scenes is so detailed and accurate that he has to have been involved somehow. The interview room in the maximum security wing was a windowless concrete box with fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh, unforgiving shadows. A single metal table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs that were bolted to the floor. Video cameras recorded every angle, and a guard station provided direct visual supervision of all interactions. Mordecai Caldwell was escorted into the room by 2 guards, his hands and feet shackled with chains that clinked softly with each step. He was a tall, thin man in his early 50s with prematurely gray hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to calculate everything they observed. Despite his restraints, there was a confidence to his bearing that was unsettling in someone who had committed such horrific acts. "Agent Blackthorne," he said as he settled into his chair, his voice cultured and precise, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I understand you specialize in cases involving serial homicide and the psychology of multiple murderers. Mr. Caldwell, I'm here because Warden Pike tells me you have information about additional murders." Before we proceed, I need to advise you of your rights and make sure you understand that anything you say can be used against you in court. Agent Blackthorne, I waived my right to counsel long ago, and I'm already sentenced to death. I'm not seeking any kind of deal or commutation. I'm here because I need to provide information about crimes that have gone unsolved for decades. Crimes that I know about in ways that I cannot fully explain. He leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes fixed on mine with uncomfortable intensity. Have you ever encountered a case where a killer seemed to know details about murders he couldn't possibly have committed? Have you ever dealt with someone who appeared to have knowledge that transcended normal experience? Mr. Caldwell, let's start with specifics. Warden Pike mentioned you claim to have information about murders in multiple states. Can you give me details about one of these cases? Temperance Stern, age 28, found dead in her apartment in Louisville, Kentucky, on September 14, 1994. She was discovered by her landlord, Hiram Fleming, when she failed to pay her rent. The apartment was locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. I felt a chill run down my spine. The Temperance Stern case was indeed from 1994, but it had never been connected to Caldwell's known crimes. In fact, it had never been definitively classified as a homicide due to the lack of obvious evidence of foul play. How do you know about this case? I killed her, Agent Blackthorne. But not in the way you might think. I never physically entered that apartment. Never touched that woman, never spoke to her. Yet I am as responsible for her death as if I had strangled her with my own hands. Caldwell's voice remained calm and factual, as if he were reciting a case study rather than describing a murder. Temperance Stern died because someone wanted her dead, and I provided the knowledge and methodology that made her murder possible. Mr. Caldwell, you were living in Portland, Oregon in 1994. Employment records show you were working as a night manager at a hotel. How could you have been involved in a murder in Kentucky? That is exactly the question that gets to the heart of what I need to tell you, Agent Blackthorne. My involvement in these murders wasn't direct physical participation. I was part of something much more complex and disturbing than a simple serial killing spree. What do you mean? I mean that for over 25 years, I was part of a network that provided consultation services to people who wanted other people dead. We didn't kill directly. We provided the knowledge, the planning, the psychological expertise that allowed others to commit perfect murders. The implications of what he was suggesting were staggering. If Caldwell was telling the truth, he was describing a criminal consulting network that helped people commit murder with impunity. But the idea seemed so far-fetched that I struggled to take it seriously. You're claiming you were part of a murder-for-hire network? Not murder-for-hire in the traditional sense, Agent Blackthorne. We didn't accept contracts to kill specific targets. We provided educational services to individuals who had their own reasons for wanting people dead. We taught them how to plan murders that would appear to be accidents, suicides, or natural deaths. And you're saying Temperance Stern was killed by someone you trained. Someone I provided detailed consultation to, yes. The client was her ex-husband, who stood to inherit a substantial life insurance payout if she died. He contacted our network through encrypted channels, explained his situation, and requested assistance in planning what would appear to be a natural death. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, his chains rattling softly. I spent 3 weeks studying Temperance Stern's routines, her medical history, her living situation, her psychological profile. Then I developed a plan that would allow her ex-husband to kill her in a way that would never be detected by law enforcement. What was the plan? Temperance suffered from severe asthma and relied on prescription inhalers to manage her condition. Her ex-husband still had a key to her apartment from when they were married. The plan was for him to replace her emergency inhaler with one that had been sabotaged to deliver a concentrated dose of allergens that would trigger a fatal asthma attack. And you believe this plan was executed? I know it was executed, Agent Blackthorne, because I received confirmation from the client, along with photographic evidence of Temperance's body. The plan worked exactly as designed. She died alone in her apartment, apparently from a severe asthma attack, and no one suspected murder. The level of detail he was providing was disturbing, but it could have been information he obtained through research rather than direct involvement. Mr. Caldwell, what you're describing could be elaborate fiction based on publicly available information about the case. Then, let me provide you with details that were never made public, Agent Blackthorne. Temperance Stern was found wearing a blue silk nightgown with a small tear near the left shoulder, caused when she fell against her coffee table during the asthma attack. There was a glass of water on her nightstand that contained traces of the allergens used to trigger her attack. And there was a photograph hidden under her mattress showing her with another man, not her ex-husband, which provided additional motive for the murder. I made careful notes, documenting not just what he was telling me, but how he was telling me. His body language was consistent with someone recounting genuine memories, rather than fabricated stories. There were none of the usual tells that indicated deception. No eye movement pattern suggesting construction of false details, no hesitation or inconsistency in his narrative. Tell me about another case. Constance Pike, age 19, college student at the University of Tennessee, found dead in her dormitory room on March 3, 1997. The official cause of death was determined to be suicide by drug overdose, but it was actually murder staged to look like suicide. Again, I felt that familiar chill. The Constance Pike case was from my early years with the Bureau, and I remembered it as a college suicide that had been investigated and closed. The client in this case was Constance's roommate, who was facing academic probation and knew that Constance's death would allow her to receive sympathy grades that would keep her from being expelled. She contacted our network for assistance in staging a convincing suicide. Caldwell's expression grew more focused as he recounted the details. Constance was a studious girl who rarely drank alcohol or used drugs, which made staging a drug overdose challenging. The plan required careful timing and specific knowledge of her schedule and habits. What was your role in planning this murder? I provided the psychological profile that identified Constance's vulnerabilities and the staging methodology that would make her death appear to be suicide. The roommate was instructed to wait for an evening when Constance was stressed about examinations, then to slip a combination of alcohol and prescription drugs into her dinner. And you believe this plan was successfully executed? I know it was, Agent Blackthorne. Constance Pike died exactly as planned, and her death was ruled suicide by local authorities. The roommate received the sympathy grades she needed and graduated with honors the following year. What evidence supports your claim that this was murder rather than suicide? Constance was left-handed, but the suicide note was written with her right hand, a detail that was noted in the police report but dismissed as irrelevant. There were also injection marks on her inner arm where the drugs were administered, but they were attributed to possible intravenous drug use despite the fact that no drug paraphernalia was found in her room. Over the next 4 hours, Mordecai Caldwell proceeded to confess involvement in 41 additional murders, spanning from 1994 to 2018. Each confession was methodical, detailed, and included information that had never been released to the public. He knew the exact methods used, the motives of the clients, the specific staging techniques employed, and details about crime scenes that only someone with intimate knowledge could have provided. But more disturbing than the accuracy of his information was the consistency of his story about the murder consultation network. According to Caldwell, the organization had been operating for over 30 years, providing planning and methodology services to individuals who wanted to kill people without being detected. "Agent Blackthorne," he said as our interview session neared its end, "I need you to understand something crucial about these confessions. I'm not seeking attention or attempting to delay my execution. I'm providing you with information about a criminal enterprise that has been responsible for hundreds of murders across multiple decades. If this network exists, why are you revealing its operations now? Because the network was dissolved 3 years ago when several key members died or were arrested on unrelated charges. The organization no longer poses a threat to my safety, and my own execution date means I have nothing left to lose by revealing its existence. How did you become involved with this network?" I was recruited during graduate school while pursuing a doctorate in criminal psychology. My dissertation research focused on methods for committing undetectable murders, and my academic advisor introduced me to individuals who were interested in practical applications of my theoretical work. "Who was your academic advisor?" "Dr. Silas Grimwood, professor of criminology at the University of Chicago. He had been secretly affiliated with the Murder Consultation Network for over 20 years and identified promising graduate students who might be suitable for recruitment." "And you agreed to participate in this network?" "Initially, I thought I was participating in legitimate academic research on criminal methodology. Dr. Grimwood presented it as a theoretical exercise designed to help law enforcement understand how sophisticated criminals might operate. It wasn't until later that I realized my consultations were being used to actually commit murders." "When did you realize what was really happening?" "About 2 years after I began providing consultations, I started receiving follow-up reports on the cases I had worked on. The reports included newspaper clippings about the deaths, police reports, and sometimes even crime scene photographs. That's when I understood that real people were dying based on plans I had developed." "Why didn't you stop at that point?" "By then, I was too deeply involved to withdraw safely. The network had documented evidence of my participation, and they made it clear that revealing their operations would result in my own death. I was trapped in a system that I had entered naively and couldn't escape without severe consequences." That evening, I began the painstaking process of verifying Caldwell's claims. I contacted law enforcement agencies across 15 states requesting case files for murders that matched his descriptions. What I discovered over the following weeks would challenge everything I thought I knew about organized crime and criminal consultation services. Every detail Caldwell had provided was accurate. Every crime scene description matched the actual evidence. Every victim's name, age, and circumstances aligned perfectly with unsolved cases that had languished in police files for years or decades. But most disturbing of all was the pattern that began to emerge as I analyzed the crimes he was describing. They weren't random murders committed by different killers. They showed consistent methodology and planning that suggested the work of a single consulting organization that had refined its techniques over decades of operation. The organization that Caldwell was describing was far more sophisticated and dangerous than any criminal enterprise I had encountered. They had successfully helped hundreds of people commit murder without detection, turning assassination into a consulting service that operated like a legitimate business. I returned to Terre Haute 1 week later with a team of federal agents and criminal analysts. We needed to conduct more detailed interviews with Caldwell and attempt to verify his claims about the Murder Consultation Network. "Mr. Caldwell," I said as we began our second session, "I verified the accuracy of the information you provided. Every detail you shared about those crime scenes was correct. Now, I need you to help me understand how this network operated and who else was involved. Agent Blackthorne. The network was structured like a legitimate consulting business. We had clients who submitted requests for services, consultants who developed customized solutions, and administrators who managed communications and payments. The only difference was that our service was planning undetectable murders. How did clients contact the network? Through encrypted channels on the dark web. Potential clients would submit detailed descriptions of their situations and their desired outcomes. The network would evaluate the requests and determine whether to accept the consultation contracts. What criteria determined whether a request was accepted? Several factors were considered: the client's ability to pay, the complexity of the proposed murder, the likelihood of successful execution without detection, and the potential risk to network security if the plan was discovered. How much did clients pay for these services? Fees ranged from $50,000 for simple cases to over $200,000 for complex situations that required extensive planning and specialized knowledge. Payment was made through cryptocurrency transactions that were virtually impossible to trace. How many people were involved in the network? At its peak, there were 12 active consultants and approximately 6 administrative personnel. Most consultants were academics or professionals with expertise in areas like chemistry, forensic science, psychology, or medicine. The administrators handled communications, financial transactions, and security protocols. Who ran the network? The operational leader was a man known only as the director. I never learned his real identity, and I suspect that even the senior administrators didn't know who he actually was. All communications were conducted through encrypted channels, and we never met in person. How did the network recruit new members? Recruitment was primarily through academic channels. Graduate students and professionals who published research on topics related to criminal methodology were identified and approached by existing network members. The recruitment process was gradual and carefully managed to avoid suspicion. Were you involved in recruiting other members? Over the years, I identified several individuals who might be suitable for recruitment, but I was never directly involved in the recruitment process itself. That was handled by senior network members who had more experience in evaluating potential security risks. The investigation expanded rapidly as federal task forces were deployed to locations identified through Caldwell's testimony. What we discovered was evidence of a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for over 3 decades, providing murder consultation services to clients across the United States and internationally. Financial records obtained through federal warrants revealed the scope of the network's operations. Over 30 years, they had processed over 600 consultation requests, generated profits exceeding $50 million, and successfully helped clients commit murders in every state except Alaska and Hawaii. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that many of the network's clients were prominent members of society. Wealthy business executives, politicians, celebrities, and professionals who had used the service to eliminate rivals, spouses, or others who threatened their interests. The client list reads like a directory of American wealth and power. Federal prosecutor Prudence Ashworth explained during a briefing on the investigation's findings. We're dealing with murder as a tool of personal and professional advancement, used by people who had the resources to pay for the most sophisticated killing methods available. The network's methodology was extraordinarily sophisticated. Each consultation began with extensive research on the intended victim, including psychological profiling, routine analysis, relationship mapping, and vulnerability assessment. Based on this research, consultants would develop customized murder plans that were designed to appear as accidents, suicides, or natural deaths. The level of planning and attention to detail rivaled anything we've seen in legitimate consulting businesses. Agent Ephraim Blackwood from our Financial Crimes Division reported. They maintained detailed records of every consultation, tracked the success rates of different methodologies, and continuously refined their techniques based on client feedback and law enforcement responses. The network had also developed sophisticated security protocols that had allowed them to operate undetected for decades. All communications were encrypted. Payments were processed through multiple cryptocurrency exchanges, and members were compartmentalized so that no single person could compromise the entire organization. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was a professional services firm that happened to specialize in murder, I observed while reviewing the evidence. They had quality control procedures, customer service protocols, and business development strategies that would be impressive in any legitimate industry. But the most chilling aspect of the investigation was discovering how many of the network's planned murders had been successfully executed without ever being detected as homicides. Police departments across the country were reopening cases that had been classified as accidents or natural deaths after discovering they matched patterns identified in the network's consultation records. We estimate that over 400 people died as a result of plans developed by this network, I reported to the federal task force investigating the case. Most of these deaths were never investigated as homicides because they appeared to be accidents or natural causes. The network's success rate in avoiding detection was over 90%. The man identified as the director was eventually traced to Dr. Silas Grimwood, the professor who had recruited Caldwell and served as the network's founder and operational leader for over 30 years. When federal agents arrested him at his university office, they found extensive records documenting the network's complete history and client database. Dr. Grimwood viewed murder as an intellectual challenge rather than a moral issue, Agent Blackwood reported after conducting his interrogation. He expressed pride in the network's success rate and showed no remorse for the hundreds of deaths that resulted from his consultations. To him, the victims were simply case studies in applied criminal methodology. Dr. Grimwood was ultimately convicted on conspiracy charges related to over 200 murders and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Most of the network's other members received lengthy prison sentences, though some were able to negotiate reduced terms in exchange for testimony against clients who had used the service. The investigation into the network's client base resulted in arrests and prosecutions across the country. Wealthy individuals who had paid for murder consultations found themselves facing charges for crimes they thought they had committed with complete impunity. Many of these cases attracted significant media attention due to the prominence of the defendants. The most shocking aspect of this case is discovering that murder has become a service industry for wealthy Americans who view killing as a business tool, Prosecutor Ashworth observed during one of the high-profile trials. These weren't crimes of passion or desperation. They were calculated business decisions made by people who could afford to pay for professional-grade assassination services. Mordecai Caldwell's cooperation with the investigation was instrumental in dismantling the murder consultation network and securing convictions against both its members and clients. His detailed testimony provided prosecutors with the evidence needed to prove conspiracy charges in cases where physical evidence was limited or non-existent. But Caldwell's own fate remained unchanged. Despite his cooperation with law enforcement, he was still scheduled for execution for the 7 murders he had committed independently of his network activities. His death sentence was carried out on October 15, 2021, exactly as originally scheduled. Mr. Caldwell's assistance in exposing this network saved countless lives and brought justice for hundreds of victims, I reflected during his final interview. but his cooperation couldn't erase the fact that he was directly responsible for 7 brutal murders that were committed for his own personal gratification rather than as part of network activities. "Agent Blackthorne," he said during our last conversation, "I want you to understand that my involvement in the consultation network began with intellectual curiosity about criminal methodology. But somewhere along the way, I became fascinated with the idea of actually implementing the plans I was developing rather than just theorizing about them. That's when you started killing independently. The network provided me with extensive knowledge about murder techniques, victim selection, and crime scene staging. Eventually, I decided to apply that knowledge for my own purposes rather than just serving as a consultant to paying clients. Do you regret your involvement in the network? I regret that so many people died as a result of plans I helped develop. But I don't regret the intellectual challenge of solving complex problems related to undetectable murder. The work was intellectually stimulating in ways that legitimate academic research could never match. The execution proceeded as scheduled, ending Mordecai Caldwell's life but not the impact of his revelations about the murder consultation network. The investigation he made possible continued for months after his death, as federal agents worked to identify and prosecute the hundreds of individuals who had used the network's services. Caldwell's confessions opened the door to one of the most significant criminal investigations in FBI history. I reported to Congress during hearings on organized crime and professional assassination services. The network he exposed had successfully commercialized murder on a scale that we never imagined possible. The case also led to significant changes in how law enforcement agencies investigate suspicious deaths that appeared to be accidents or natural causes. New protocols were established for detecting signs of sophisticated murder staging, and training programs were developed to help investigators recognize patterns that might indicate professional assassination planning. The techniques developed by this network were so sophisticated that they fooled experienced investigators for decades, I explained during a training session at the FBI Academy. We need to fundamentally change how we approach death investigations to account for the possibility that what appears to be natural or accidental might actually be the result of professional murder consultation. 3 years after Caldwell's execution, law enforcement agencies continue to investigate cases that may have involved the murder consultation network. New evidence periodically surfaces that connects previously unsolved deaths to clients or methodologies identified in the network's records. The scope of this criminal enterprise was so vast that we may never identify all of its victims or prosecute all of its clients, I acknowledged during a recent case review. But the investigation has already resulted in justice for hundreds of families who never knew their loved ones had been murdered. The psychological impact of investigating the murder consultation network has been profound for everyone involved, confronting the reality that there was an organized business dedicated to helping people commit undetectable murder challenges, fundamental assumptions about the nature of evil and the society we live in. You start to look at every accidental death differently after working a case like this, Agent Blackwood admitted during a recent conversation. You wonder how many people who died in car accidents, house fires, or apparent medical emergencies were actually victims of professionally planned murders. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case is the knowledge that the demand for murder consultation services hasn't disappeared with the network's dissolution. Intelligence suggests that other organizations have emerged to fill the void left by Dr. Grimwood's operation, using refined techniques and improved security protocols. The market for professional murder planning continues to exist. I reported to the federal task force that monitors organized assassination activities. Wealthy individuals who view murder as a business tool will always seek services that allow them to eliminate competitors, rivals, or inconvenient family members without facing legal consequences. The case has also highlighted the vulnerability of academic and professional communities to recruitment by criminal organizations. Universities and research institutions have implemented new security protocols designed to prevent the misuse of legitimate research for criminal purposes. The network recruited some of the most intelligent and educated individuals in their respective fields. Dr. Clementine Pike from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit observed during a recent symposium. The combination of intellectual challenge and financial reward proved irresistible to people who might never have considered participating in conventional criminal activities. 5 years after the investigation began, the Murder Consultation Network case remains one of the most significant organized crime prosecutions in American history. Over 200 individuals have been convicted on charges related to conspiracy, murder, and racketeering, with sentences ranging from decades in prison to life without parole. But the case also serves as a reminder that criminal organizations will always adapt to take advantage of technological advances and social changes. The Murder Consultation Network represented a new model of organized crime, one that treated assassination as a professional service rather than a crude criminal activity. The techniques and organizational methods pioneered by this network have influenced other criminal enterprises, I warned during a recent intelligence briefing. We're seeing evidence of similar consultation models being applied to other illegal activities, from fraud and identity theft to drug trafficking and human trafficking. The investigation has also revealed the extent to which wealthy and powerful individuals are willing to use criminal services when they believe they can avoid consequences. The client base for the Murder Consultation Network included some of the most respected members of American society, people whose public personas were completely at odds with their private willingness to pay for murder. The most shocking aspect of this case isn't the existence of the network itself. It's the discovery that there was sufficient demand for professional murder services to sustain a multi-million-dollar business for over 30 years, Prosecutor Ashworth reflected during a recent interview about the case's impact on the criminal justice system. The legacy of Mordecai Caldwell's confessions extends far beyond the specific crimes he revealed. The investigation he made possible has fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches organized crime, death investigation, and the intersection between legitimate professional expertise and criminal activity. Caldwell's cooperation with our investigation was motivated primarily by intellectual pride rather than genuine remorse, I observed during his psychological evaluation. He wanted credit for the sophistication of the network's methodologies and his role in developing techniques that had fooled law enforcement for decades. But regardless of his motivations, Caldwell's revelations provided law enforcement with unprecedented insight into how modern criminal organizations operate. The Murder Consultation Network represented a new paradigm in organized crime, one that leveraged legitimate expertise and professional methodologies to maximize criminal effectiveness while minimizing detection risks. The case file remains open as investigations continue into related criminal enterprises and potential copycat organizations. The techniques and organizational models revealed through Caldwell's confessions have provided a blueprint that other criminal groups may attempt to replicate or adapt for their own purposes. The work is never finished, I remind myself when reflecting on the case's ongoing impact. Every network we dismantle, every technique we expose, every criminal we prosecute represents progress in the never-ending struggle between law enforcement and those who profit from human suffering. The Mordecai Caldwell case taught me that evil doesn't always present itself in the form of obvious monsters. Sometimes it wears the mask of intellectual respectability, hiding behind academic credentials and professional expertise while facilitating some of the most horrific crimes imaginable. But the case also demonstrated that even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises can be defeated when law enforcement has the resources and determination to pursue justice, regardless of the wealth and power of the perpetrators. The conviction of hundreds of network members and clients proved that no one is above the law when their crimes are finally exposed. In the end, Mordecai Caldwell's confessions provided more than just information about specific murders. They revealed an entire hidden world where murder had been commercialized and systematized by people who viewed killing as an intellectual challenge rather than a moral transgression. Understanding that world has made law enforcement better prepared to confront similar threats in the future. The darkness revealed by this case will always be with those of us who investigated it. But so will the knowledge that justice eventually prevailed, that the victims received the recognition they deserved, and that a criminal enterprise responsible for hundreds of deaths was finally brought to an end. Some cases end with arrests and convictions. Others end with the realization that the true scope of criminal activity extends far beyond what anyone imagined possible. The Mordecai Caldwell case ended with both. Justice for the victims, but also the sobering knowledge that there will always be people willing to profit from murder, and that our vigilance must never end. The work continues, one case at a time, one conviction at a time, one network at a time. And somewhere in America, other criminal enterprises are operating, waiting to be exposed by the next Mordecai Caldwell who decides that cooperation is preferable to execution. Until then, we remain watchful, ready to pursue justice wherever it leads us, no matter how dark the path becomes. As an FBI agent specializing in witness protection and organized crime cases, I believed I understood the complexities of identity, deception, and the intricate web of lies that criminals weave to escape justice. I had managed hundreds of witnesses, relocated families, and created new identities for people whose testimony was crucial to dismantling criminal organizations. But nothing in my 21-year career prepared me for the case of Ambrose Whitlock, a man who returned from the dead carrying secrets that would shatter my understanding of life, death, and the spaces between them. My name is Special Agent Serafina Cross, and I work out of the FBI's Witness Protection Division in Arlington, Virginia. I've overseen the relocation and protection of over 300 witnesses, from low-level drug dealers to high-ranking members of organized crime families. My specialty is creating bulletproof identities that can withstand scrutiny from both law enforcement and criminal organizations seeking revenge against those who betrayed them. On September 8, 2023, at precisely 3:47 p.m., I received a call that would transform everything I thought I knew about the nature of witness protection and the fundamental laws that govern existence itself. The call came from Deputy Marshal Cornelius Ashworth, who managed the day-to-day operations of several high-priority witnesses in the Southern District of New York. Agent Cross. His voice carried an edge of confusion and fear that I'd never heard from such an experienced law enforcement officer. We have a situation that requires immediate federal response. It involves Ambrose Whitlock, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you challenges everything we know about how the program works. Ambrose Whitlock had entered federal witness protection on March 23, 2013, after providing crucial testimony against the Magnolia crime family, one of New York's most powerful organized crime syndicates. His testimony had resulted in the conviction of 17 family members, including boss Thaddeus Magnolia and underboss Ezra Blackwood. Whitlock's information had dismantled a criminal empire that had operated for over 40 years. "What's the situation, Deputy Marshal?" Ambrose Whitlock walked into our Manhattan field office this morning, carrying proper WITSEC identification, claiming he needed to report a security breach in his protection. Agent Cross, according to our records, Ambrose Whitlock died of a heart attack in Phoenix, Arizona on June 15, 2018. We have a death certificate, burial records, and closed his case file 5 years ago. I felt that familiar tightening in my stomach that comes when a case is about to upend everything you believe about reality. Deputy Marshal, are you certain this person is actually Ambrose Whitlock? That's what makes this so impossible, Agent Cross. Fingerprints match perfectly. DNA analysis confirms identity. Even his dental records align with our files. But the man sitting in our interview room claims he's been living under federal protection in Seattle, Washington for the past 10 years, and he has documentation to support that claim. What kind of documentation? Credit cards, bank statements, rental agreements, employment records, medical files, a complete paper trail showing continuous residence in Seattle from 2013 to present. But Agent Cross, we have identical documentation showing he died in Phoenix in 2018. 2 complete, verifiable life histories for the same person, both supported by official records. The drive from Arlington to Manhattan gave me time to review Ambrose Whitlock's original case file, which made for disturbing reading even under normal circumstances. Whitlock had been a mid-level accountant for the Magnolia crime family, responsible for managing their financial operations and money laundering schemes. His decision to cooperate with federal investigators had come after witnessing a brutal murder that convinced him his own life was in danger. According to the file, Whitlock had provided detailed information about the family's structure, operations, and financial arrangements. His testimony had been crucial to securing RICO convictions against key family members, effectively destroying their ability to operate as a criminal organization. In exchange for his cooperation, he had been relocated to Phoenix with a new identity and sufficient financial support to start over. The Manhattan Federal Building was a fortress of concrete and steel, designed to project the power and authority of the federal government. Deputy Marshal Ashworth met me at the security checkpoint, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and the weathered expression of someone who had spent decades managing dangerous situations. Agent Cross, I need you to understand something before you meet with Whitlock. In 28 years of witness protection work, I've never encountered anything like this. This man is physically identical to the Ambrose Whitlock we relocated in 2013. But he's claiming experiences and knowledge that contradict everything in our records. He led me through a series of security checkpoints, each one more restrictive than the last. According to our files, Ambrose Whitlock was a nervous, frightened man who jumped at shadows and required constant reassurance about his safety. The man in our interview room is calm, confident, and seems to possess knowledge about witness protection procedures that he shouldn't have. What kind of knowledge? Operational details about how we create new identities, relocate witnesses, and maintain their security. Information that's classified above his clearance level and wasn't shared with him during his original briefings. He's also demonstrated awareness of other witnesses in the program, people he should have no knowledge of. We stopped at a final checkpoint where guards verified our identities and credentials. Agent Cross, there's something else. The man in our interview room doesn't just claim to be Ambrose Whitlock. He claims that the Ambrose Whitlock who died in Phoenix was an imposter, and that he's been trying to contact us for years to report identity theft within the Witness Protection Program. The interview room was a windowless concrete box with fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh, unforgiving shadows. Video cameras recorded every angle, and one-way glass allowed observation from an adjacent room. Sitting at the metal table, reading a newspaper with calm concentration, was a man who appeared to be in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and intelligent brown eyes. He looked exactly like the photographs in Ambrose Whitlock's original case file, down to a distinctive scar on his left hand from a childhood accident. But there was something different about his demeanor, a confidence and self-possession that hadn't been present in the frightened man who had entered witness protection a decade earlier. "Agent Cross," he said as I entered the room, his voice carrying a slight New York accent that matched the original Whitlock's speech patterns. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I understand the situation is unusual, but I need you to know that someone has been living my life for the past 5 years. Mr. Whitlock, I need to begin by verifying your identity and understanding exactly what you're claiming. According to federal records, you died of a heart attack in Phoenix, Arizona, on June 15, 2018. Agent Cross, I've never been to Phoenix in my life. I've been living in Seattle under federal protection since 2013, exactly as originally planned. The man who died in Phoenix was using my identity, my social security number, and my witness protection documentation. He reached into his jacket and produced a wallet containing multiple forms of identification, all bearing his name and photograph. I have credit cards, a driver's license, bank statements, and employment records showing continuous residence in Seattle. I work as an accountant for Ephraim Industries, and I've been filing tax returns under my protected identity for 10 years. I examined the documentation carefully. Everything appeared genuine, from the wear patterns on the cards to the authentic-looking government seals on official documents. But more disturbing was the fact that all the identification showed consistent use over the entire 10-year period, with no gaps that would indicate recent fabrication. Mr. Whitlock, if you've been living in Seattle for 10 years, why are you coming forward now? Why didn't you report this identity theft when it occurred? Because I didn't know about it until recently, Agent Cross. The Witness Protection Program is designed to keep witnesses isolated from information about their former lives and identities. I've been living quietly in Seattle, following all protocols, maintaining minimal contact with federal authorities as instructed. He leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes fixed on mine with uncomfortable intensity. But 3 weeks ago, I received a visit from someone who claimed to be investigating irregularities in the Witness Protection Program. He showed me newspaper clippings about my supposed death in Phoenix, along with evidence that someone had been using my identity in Arizona. Who was this investigator? He identified himself as Deputy Inspector Phineas Grimwood from the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General. He said there had been a security breach in the Witness Protection Database and that several witnesses had been compromised by identity theft within the program itself. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no Deputy Inspector Phineas Grimwood in the DOJ Office of Inspector General. I had verified that before driving to Manhattan. Either Whitlock was lying about this mysterious investigator, or someone was running an elaborate operation to manipulate witness protection cases. Mr. Whitlock, can you describe this investigator in detail? Tall man, probably in his 40s, with dark hair and a pronounced scar running from his left ear to his jawline. He spoke with authority about federal procedures, and he had access to information about my original case that only someone with high-level clearance could have obtained. What specific information did he share? Details about my testimony against the Magnolia crime family, including conversations with prosecutors that were never documented in official transcripts. He knew about private agreements between me and federal authorities, financial arrangements for my relocation, and security protocols that were implemented specifically for my case. Whitlock's description was troubling, because it suggested someone with intimate knowledge of witness protection operations was manipulating the system for unknown purposes. Did this investigator ask you to take any specific actions? He instructed me to come to the Manhattan field office and report the identity theft, claiming that federal authorities needed to verify my status and investigate how my protected identity had been compromised. he also gave me this. He produced a business card that appeared to be officially issued by the Department of Justice. The card looked authentic, complete with government seals and security features, but I knew it was fabricated because no such position existed within the DOJ hierarchy. Agent Cross, I need you to understand that I've been living under federal protection for 10 years, following every protocol, maintaining the low profile that was required of me. I'm only here because I was told that my safety depended on reporting this identity theft immediately. Over the next 4 hours, I conducted a comprehensive interview with the man claiming to be Ambrose Whitlock. His knowledge of the original case was extensive and accurate, including details that had never been documented in official records. He knew about private conversations with prosecutors, specific threats made by Magnolia crime family members, and operational details of the investigation that had led to his cooperation. But more disturbing was his detailed knowledge of witness protection procedures and protocols that went far beyond what any witness should know. He understood how new identities were created, how financial support was provided, and how security was maintained for high-risk witnesses. His information was accurate enough that he could have used it to compromise other witnesses in the program. Mr. Whitlock, you seem to know a great deal about witness protection operations beyond your own case. How did you acquire this information? Agent Cross, when you've been in the program for 10 years, you learn things. You observe patterns. You pick up information from federal personnel. You develop an understanding of how the system works. It's natural for someone in my position to become educated about the program that's protecting their life. But your knowledge seems to extend to operational details that wouldn't be shared with witnesses under any circumstances. Perhaps my knowledge comes from paying attention, Agent Cross. When your life depends on a system, you make it your business to understand how that system functions. I've had 10 years to observe, analyze, and learn. There was something unsettling about his response, a hint that he possessed information sources beyond normal observation and experience. But before I could pursue that line of questioning further, he provided information that changed the entire nature of the investigation. Agent Cross, I need to tell you something about the man who died in Phoenix using my identity. According to the information provided by Deputy Inspector Grimwood, that man wasn't randomly selected to impersonate me. He was specifically chosen because of his resemblance to me, and he was provided with detailed information about my background and case history. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that someone within the federal government orchestrated the identity theft as part of a larger operation. The man in Phoenix was a willing participant who was paid to assume my identity and live my protected life. His death wasn't from natural causes. It was the conclusion of whatever assignment he had been given. The implications were staggering. If Whitlock was correct, we were dealing with a conspiracy within the witness protection program itself, involving the deliberate manipulation of witness identities for unknown purposes. Do you have evidence to support these claims? Deputy Inspector Grimwood provided me with documents showing financial transactions between federal accounts and the man who died in Phoenix, payments that began shortly before my supposed relocation to Arizona and continued until his death. The payments were coded as operational expenses, but they corresponded exactly to the timeline of his impersonation. He produced a folder containing what appeared to be official financial records, showing a series of payments to someone named Josiah Blackwood, totaling over $200,000 across 5 years. The payments were authorized through accounts associated with the Department of Justice, but I couldn't verify their authenticity without access to classified financial databases. That evening, I returned to Arlington and began the complex process of verifying Ambrose Whitlock's claims. What I discovered over the following weeks would challenge everything I thought I knew about the Witness Protection Program and the integrity of federal law enforcement operations. The man who had died in Phoenix was indeed named Josiah Blackwood, and his background showed suspicious gaps that suggested possible covert operations involvement. Financial records showed payments from federal accounts that corresponded to the timeline Whitlock had described, though the specific authorization codes were classified above my clearance level. Most disturbing of all was what I discovered when I contacted the Seattle field office to verify Whitlock's claimed residence history. According to their records, no one matching Whitlock's description had ever lived at the address he provided. The apartment building existed, but the unit number he specified had been vacant for over 3 years. Yet, when I dispatched agents to physically investigate the Seattle address, they found clear evidence of recent habitation. Personal belongings, utility records, and neighbor testimony all supported Whitlock's claim that he had been living there continuously for 10 years. The physical evidence conflicted directly with official records, creating an impossible situation where both versions of reality appeared to be simultaneously true. Agent Cross, SAC Patricia Whitmore, said when I briefed her on the developing situation, "What you're describing suggests either the most sophisticated identity manipulation in the history of the Witness Protection Program, or we're dealing with someone who has found a way to exist in 2 places at once." Ma'am, the evidence supports both possibilities, which should be impossible. We have documented proof that Ambrose Whitlock died in Phoenix in 2018, but we also have equally valid proof that he's been living in Seattle for the entire time period. The 2 versions of his life history are both supported by official records and physical evidence. Have you considered the possibility that this is an elaborate deception designed to expose weaknesses in our protection protocols? That was my initial assessment, ma'am. But the scope of documentation and evidence required for such a deception would be beyond the capabilities of any criminal organization. We're looking at falsified federal records, fabricated financial transactions, and physical evidence planted across multiple jurisdictions over a decade-long timeline. SAC Whitmore was quiet for several moments, processing the implications of what I was reporting. Agent Cross, I'm authorizing you to conduct a full investigation into this situation. I want every aspect of Whitlock's claims verified or refuted. If there's a security breach in the Witness Protection Program, we need to identify it and contain it immediately. The investigation consumed the next month of my life, as I worked with specialists from multiple federal agencies to trace every thread of Ambrose Whitlock's impossible existence. What we discovered was a labyrinth of documentation, evidence, and official records that painted 2 completely contradictory but equally verifiable pictures of the same person's life. The Phoenix version of Ambrose Whitlock had lived in a modest apartment, worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, and maintained the low profile expected of a protected witness. Neighbors remembered him as quiet and reclusive, someone who kept to himself and rarely socialized. Medical records showed regular treatment for anxiety and depression, consistent with the psychological profile of a witness living under assumed identity. His death from a heart attack had been thoroughly investigated by local authorities, who found no evidence of foul play. The autopsy revealed arterial blockage consistent with natural cardiac failure, and toxicology tests showed no presence of drugs or poisons. His body had been claimed by a cousin from New York and buried in a cemetery outside Phoenix, with a headstone bearing his protected identity name. But the Seattle version of Ambrose Whitlock told an entirely different story. This version had lived in a comfortable apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, worked as a senior accountant for a respected consulting firm, and maintained an active social life within the limits allowed by protection protocols. Co-workers described him as competent and reliable, someone who had been promoted twice and earned the respect of his supervisors. His apartment contained 10 years' worth of accumulated possessions, from books and furniture to photographs and personal mementos that showed a life lived consistently in one location. Utility records, bank statements, and employment files all supported continuous residence from 2013 to 2023, with no gaps or inconsistencies that would suggest recent fabrication. Agent Cross, Dr. Magnolia Stern from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit said, after reviewing all available evidence, "What you're describing is scientifically impossible. A single individual cannot exist in two separate locations simultaneously, maintain two distinct life histories, and die in one location while continuing to live in another." Dr. Stern, "I understand the impossibility of what we're investigating, but the evidence is overwhelming. Both versions of Ambrose Whitlock's post-2013 existence are supported by documentation that passes every authentication test we can perform. Then we're dealing with either the most sophisticated fraud in federal law enforcement history, or we're confronting something that challenges our understanding of the fundamental nature of identity and existence." It was Dr. Stern who suggested the next phase of the investigation, a comprehensive psychological evaluation of the man claiming to be Ambrose Whitlock, combined with advanced forensic analysis of all documentation and physical evidence. If we were dealing with an elaborate deception, intensive testing would reveal inconsistencies or fabrications. If we were dealing with something beyond normal understanding, the tests would at least document the extent of the impossibility. The psychological evaluation took place over 3 days, using every technique available to detect deception, false memory implantation, or mental illness. The man, claiming to be Ambrose Whitlock, underwent hours of interviews, hypnosis sessions, and standardized psychological tests designed to reveal inconsistencies in his claimed identity and experiences. Agent Cross, Dr. Stern reported after completing her evaluation, "This individual exhibits all the psychological characteristics consistent with someone who has genuinely lived the experiences he claims. His memories show the emotional weight and contextual detail of authentic autobiography rather than fabricated narrative. But his knowledge of witness protection operations goes far beyond what any witness should possess. He understands procedures, protocols, and operational details that are classified above his clearance level. That's where the evaluation becomes disturbing, Agent Cross. When questioned about his knowledge of protection protocols, his responses suggest access to information sources that he cannot or will not identify. He claims his knowledge comes from observation and deduction, but the scope and accuracy suggest direct access to classified materials." Dr. Stern paused, reviewing her notes with obvious concern. "There's something else, Agent Cross. During hypnosis sessions, this individual demonstrated awareness of other witnesses in the protection program, people he should have no knowledge of. He provided accurate details about their relocated identities, their security arrangements, and even their psychological profiles. How could he have access to that information? That's the question that concerns me most. Either he's had unauthorized access to the witness protection database for an extended period, or he's obtaining information through methods that don't involve conventional intelligence gathering." The forensic analysis of documentation and physical evidence was even more disturbing. Every piece of identification, every financial record, and every official document associated with the Seattle version of Ambrose Whitlock passed authentication tests. The paper stocks, security features, and printing techniques were all consistent with legitimate government issuance over the claimed timeframes. But what made the results impossible to accept was that identical authentication tests confirmed the legitimacy of documents associated with the Phoenix version of Whitlock. Both sets of documentation were genuine, Both were properly issued through official channels, and both covered the same time periods for the same individual. Agent Cross, the forensic specialist, reported, "We're looking at two complete, verifiable life histories for a single person. Every document in both sets passes authentication testing, and all security features are consistent with legitimate government issuance. Scientifically speaking, both versions of Ambrose Whitlock's post-2013 existence are equally valid. Is there any possibility that one set of documents was fabricated using government resources? That's what makes this so disturbing, Agent Cross. The level of access and expertise required to create false documentation this sophisticated would be beyond the capabilities of any criminal organization. We're looking at fabrication that would require resources available only to federal intelligence agencies. Are you suggesting that a federal agency created false documentation for Ambrose Whitlock? I'm suggesting that someone with access to the highest levels of government document production capabilities has been involved in this case. Whether that involvement was authorized or represents a rogue operation within the federal government, I cannot determine. 6 weeks after the investigation began, I requested a final interview with the man claiming to be Ambrose Whitlock. I wanted to confront him with the evidence we had gathered and give him an opportunity to explain the impossibilities we had uncovered. "Mr. Whitlock," I said as we sat across from each other in the same interview room where our first meeting had taken place, "we've spent 6 weeks investigating your claims, and what we've discovered challenges everything we understand about identity, documentation, and the nature of existence itself. Agent Cross, I appreciate the thoroughness of your investigation. I understand that my situation is unusual and difficult to explain through conventional means. Mr. Whitlock, we have verified evidence that you died in Phoenix in 2018, and equally verified evidence that you've been living in Seattle for the entire time period. Both versions of your post-2013 existence are supported by authentic documentation and physical evidence. Can you explain how this is possible? Agent Cross, I can only tell you what I experienced, and what I experienced was 10 years of life in Seattle under federal protection. The man who died in Phoenix may have been using my identity, but he wasn't me. But you also demonstrate knowledge of witness protection operations that goes far beyond what any witness should possess. You know details about other witnesses in the program, operational procedures that are classified, and security protocols that weren't shared with you during your original briefings. For the first time since I had met him, Ambrose Whitlock appeared uncomfortable, his confident demeanor wavering slightly. Agent Cross, when you've been in the program as long as I have, you learn things. You develop an understanding of how the system works, and you pick up information from various sources. What sources? Other witnesses, Agent Cross, federal personnel who aren't as careful as they should be about operational security. Sometimes information comes from unexpected places when you know how to listen and observe. Mr. Whitlock, the information you possess couldn't be obtained through casual observation or indiscreet conversations. You have access to classified materials that are restricted to senior federal personnel. How did you obtain this information? He was quiet for a long moment, his brown eyes studying my face as if trying to determine how much truth I could handle. Agent Cross, have you ever considered the possibility that the Witness Protection Program operates on principles that go beyond conventional law enforcement procedures? What do you mean? I mean that protecting witnesses from organized crime requires more than just new identities and relocation. It requires methods and capabilities that aren't acknowledged in official procedures or public documentation. Are you suggesting that the Witness Protection Program uses classified technologies or procedures? I'm suggesting that when witness safety depends on completely erasing someone's former existence, and creating a new identity that can withstand scrutiny from sophisticated criminal organizations, conventional methods may not be sufficient. Whitlock leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Agent Cross, what if I told you that some witnesses in the program don't just receive new identities, they receive new realities? Complete, verifiable histories that exist independently of their original lives, supported by evidence and documentation that is genuine because it was created through methods that transcend normal document fabrication. The implications of what he was suggesting were staggering. If the Witness Protection Program had access to technologies or methods that could create alternate realities for witnesses, it would explain the impossible documentation we had discovered. But it would also mean that the federal government possessed capabilities that challenged the fundamental laws of physics and human existence. Mr. Whitlock, what you're suggesting is that the federal government can create alternate versions of reality. I'm suggesting that the Witness Protection Program may use methods that aren't limited by conventional understanding of identity and existence. When a witness's life depends on complete separation from their former identity, extraordinary measures may be necessary. And you believe you're the beneficiary of these extraordinary measures? Agent Cross, I believe that when I entered witness protection in 2013, something more than conventional relocation occurred. My existence in Seattle isn't just supported by false documentation, it's supported by a complete alternate reality that was created specifically to protect me from the Magnolia crime family. But if that's true, then what was the man who died in Phoenix? Perhaps he was what remained of my original existence, Agent Cross. Perhaps the extraordinary measures that protected me in Seattle required that my original identity be maintained elsewhere, lived by someone who could serve as a decoy while I existed safely in an alternate reality. The conversation was venturing into territory that challenged every assumption I had about the nature of reality and the capabilities of the federal government. But the evidence we had gathered seemed to support Whitlock's impossible claims, pointing toward conclusions that I struggled to accept. Mr. Whitlock, if what you're suggesting is true, then there are others in the Witness Protection Program who exist in alternate realities created by federal authorities. Agent Cross, I can only speak to my own experience, but yes, I believe there are witnesses whose protection required methods that go beyond conventional relocation and identity change. How many others? I don't know the exact number, but during my 10 years in the program I've encountered others who seem to possess the same kind of enhanced protection that I received. Witnesses whose new identities were supported by realities so complete and verifiable that they transcended normal document fabrication. Have you maintained contact with these other witnesses? Not contact in the conventional sense, Agent Cross, but awareness. When you exist in an alternate reality created for your protection, you develop sensitivity to others who share that experience. We recognize each other, even though direct communication isn't possible. Over the following days, I attempted to verify Whitlock's claims about other witnesses who might be living in federally created alternate realities. What I discovered was a pattern of cases similar to his. Witnesses whose post-protection existences were supported by documentation and evidence that was too complete, too verifiable, to have been created through conventional means. In each case, the witnesses had testified against major organized crime families, providing information that had resulted in significant convictions and the dismantling of criminal organizations. Their protection requirements had been classified at the highest levels, with operational details restricted to a small number of senior federal personnel. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that several of these witnesses had died while in protection, their deaths occurring under circumstances that left no doubt about their authenticity. Yet other versions of these same witnesses continued to exist in alternate locations, living lives that were equally documented and verifiable. Agent Cross, SAC Whitmore said when I briefed her on my findings, what you're describing suggests that the Witness Protection Program has capabilities that aren't acknowledged in any official procedures or documentation. If these capabilities exist, they represent the most classified aspects of federal law enforcement operations. Ma'am, the evidence points toward methods that transcend conventional understanding of identity creation and reality manipulation. If the federal government possesses these capabilities, their implications extend far beyond witness protection. Agent Cross, this investigation has reached levels of classification that exceed my authority. I'm transferring this case to a joint task force with representatives from agencies that have the clearance necessary to address the national security implications of your findings. The joint task force included representatives from agencies that I was not authorized to identify in official reports. Their investigation continued for several additional weeks, during which I was excluded from most activities and briefings. When I was finally debriefed on their conclusions, the information provided was heavily redacted and classified at levels that prevented me from discussing it with anyone who lacked appropriate clearances. What I was told, in carefully qualified language, was that the Witness Protection Program did indeed possess capabilities that weren't acknowledged in public documentation. These capabilities were developed in response to the increasing sophistication of organized crime families and their ability to penetrate conventional protection methods. The technology and procedures involved were classified at the highest levels of government, developed through partnerships with agencies that operated in areas of research and development that challenged conventional understanding of physics and human consciousness. The witnesses who benefited from these enhanced protection methods were selected based on the significance of their testimony and the level of threat they faced from criminal organizations. Ambrose Whitlock was confirmed to be a legitimate witness who had received enhanced protection due to the comprehensive nature of his testimony against the Magnolia crime family. The alternate reality supporting his existence in Seattle was genuine, created through classified methods that ensured his complete separation from his former identity. The man who had died in Phoenix was also genuine, a manifestation of Whitlock's original identity that was maintained to provide cover for the enhanced protection he had received. His death was natural and unrelated to any operational considerations, though it had occurred at a time that was convenient for concluding that aspect of Whitlock's protection. Agent Cross, the task force representative explained during my final briefing, the methods used to protect certain high-value witnesses represent some of the most classified capabilities possessed by the federal government. These methods are necessary to ensure witness safety in cases where conventional protection would be inadequate. Are you confirming that the federal government can create alternate realities for witness protection purposes? Agent Cross, I'm confirming that the government possesses capabilities that aren't acknowledged in public documentation, and that these capabilities are used selectively to protect witnesses whose testimony is crucial to national security interests. How many witnesses are living in federally created alternate realities? That information is classified beyond your clearance level, Agent Cross. What I can tell you is that the number is small, the selection criteria are extremely restrictive, and the operational security surrounding these cases is absolute. The investigation was officially concluded with a report that was classified at levels that prevented me from retaining copies or discussing the contents with anyone who lacked appropriate clearances. Ambrose Whitlock was returned to his protected status in Seattle, with enhanced security measures that ensured his continued safety and the integrity of his alternate reality. But the case left me with questions that haunted my understanding of reality and the capabilities of the federal government. If the Witness Protection Program could create complete alternate realities for selected witnesses, What other applications might exist for these technologies? How many people might be living in federally created realities without knowing it? And what were the long-term implications of government capabilities that could manipulate the fundamental nature of existence itself? 6 months after the investigation concluded, I received a visit from someone who identified himself as Deputy Inspector Phineas Grimwood from the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General, the same fictitious investigator that Ambrose Whitlock had claimed to have met. This time, however, the man was real, his credentials were authentic, and his presence in my office was authorized through official channels. "Agent Cross," he said as he settled into the chair across from my desk, "I'm here to discuss certain aspects of the Ambrose Whitlock case that weren't addressed in your official investigation. Inspector Grimwood, according to my research, no one with your name and title existed in the DOJ Office of Inspector General when Whitlock claimed to have met with you." "That's correct, Agent Cross. At that time, I was working in a different capacity for agencies that aren't acknowledged in public documentation. My current position was created specifically to oversee cases involving the enhanced protection capabilities that were used in Whitlock's situation. Are you telling me that you were the mysterious investigator who prompted Whitlock to contact federal authorities?" "I'm telling you that Whitlock's contact with federal authorities was carefully orchestrated to test the security and effectiveness of his enhanced protection. His appearance at the Manhattan field office wasn't spontaneous. It was a planned assessment of how well his alternate reality could withstand scrutiny from experienced federal investigators." The implications were staggering. If Grimwood was telling the truth, then everything about the Whitlock investigation had been a test, designed to evaluate the effectiveness of classified protection technologies. "Inspector Grimwood, are you saying that the entire investigation was staged to test government capabilities that I wasn't authorized to know about?" "Agent Cross, I'm saying that you conducted exactly the kind of thorough, professional investigation that we needed to evaluate the effectiveness of Whitlock's protection. Your findings confirmed that the alternate reality created for him was sufficiently robust to withstand intensive scrutiny from experienced federal personnel. But the investigation revealed impossible contradictions. 2 verifiable versions of the same person's existence. And those contradictions were necessary to test whether enhanced protection methods could survive investigation by agents who weren't briefed on their existence. The fact that you documented the impossibilities without being able to explain them confirms that the technologies work as designed." Grimwood reached into his briefcase and produced a folder containing documents that I was not authorized to review without signing additional security agreements. "Agent Cross, the Witness Protection Program represents only one application of capabilities that have far broader implications for federal law, enforcement, and national security. What other applications? That information is classified beyond your current clearance level. However, I can tell you that the technologies used to create alternate realities for witness protection are also used to protect federal personnel operating in deep cover, to create false identities for intelligence operatives, and to provide cover for operations that require absolute secrecy. How long has the government possessed these capabilities? Longer than most people would believe, Agent Cross. The fundamental research began during World War II, advanced significantly during the Cold War, and reached operational status in the early 1990s. What you investigated in the Whitlock case represents mature technology that has been refined over decades of development and testing." Inspector Grimwood closed his briefcase and prepared to leave. "Agent Cross, your investigation of the Whitlock case has demonstrated your ability to handle cases involving classified capabilities that challenge conventional understanding. Would you be interested in reassignment to a division that specializes in these kinds of investigations?" The offer was tempting, but it would require security clearances that would fundamentally change my relationship with family, friends, and the normal world. It would mean entering a realm of government operations that existed beyond public knowledge or oversight, dealing with capabilities that challenge the fundamental nature of reality itself. Inspector Grimwood, I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll remain in my current position. Some knowledge carries too high a price. He smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. Agent Cross, I understand your hesitation, but you should know that knowledge, once acquired, cannot be forgotten. Your investigation of the Whitlock case has already changed your understanding of what's possible. That change is irreversible. After he left, I sat in my office staring at the case files that contained evidence of impossible realities and government capabilities that transcended conventional understanding. The official report on the Whitlock case was classified beyond my ability to discuss it, but the memories of what I had discovered would haunt me for the rest of my career. 3 months later, I encountered another case that challenged everything I thought I knew about witness protection and the nature of identity itself. A woman named Clementine Blackwood contacted our Seattle field office, claiming that someone had been living her life for the past 7 years while she existed in what she called the spaces between official records. Like Ambrose Whitlock, she possessed 2 complete sets of documentation supporting contradictory life histories. Like Whitlock, she demonstrated knowledge of witness protection operations that went far beyond what any witness should possess. And like Whitlock, her case revealed evidence of federal capabilities that operated beyond public acknowledgement or oversight. But this time, I declined to investigate. Some doors, once opened, lead to places from which you can never return. Some knowledge extracts a price that continues to compound over time, and some investigations reveal truths about the nature of reality and government power that are too dangerous to pursue. The Ambrose Whitlock case remains officially closed, its conclusions buried in classification levels that ensure most federal personnel will never know what was discovered. Whitlock continues to live in Seattle, protected by an alternate reality so complete and verifiable that it has become indistinguishable from normal existence. But late at night, when I lie awake thinking about the investigation and its implications, I find myself wondering about the true scope of government capabilities that operate beyond public knowledge. How many people are living in federally created alternate realities? How many identities exist only because they were manufactured through technologies that challenge the fundamental laws of physics? And most disturbing of all, I wonder whether my own existence is entirely natural, or whether I might be living in a reality that was created for purposes I cannot understand. When government capabilities extend to the manipulation of existence itself, how can anyone be certain that their memories, their identity, and their reality are genuine? The Witness Protection Program, as I understood it before the Whitlock case, was a straightforward process of relocation and identity change designed to keep cooperating witnesses safe from criminal retaliation. Now, I know it's something far more complex and disturbing. A system that can create alternate realities indistinguishable from natural existence, supported by documentation and evidence that passes every authentication test because it was created through methods that transcend conventional fabrication. 6 months after declining Inspector Grimwood's offer, I received a package at my home address containing documents that I was not authorized to possess. The package had no return address, and security cameras at my apartment building showed no record of its delivery. Inside were case files for dozens of witnesses whose protection had involved the creation of alternate realities, each one living lives that were simultaneously genuine and artificially constructed. The files revealed the true scope of the program. Hundreds of witnesses living in federally created realities across the United States, their existences supported by technologies that could manipulate the fundamental nature of identity and consciousness. Some were living single alternate lives, like Ambrose Whitlock, while others existed in multiple realities simultaneously, their consciousness split across different versions of themselves. But most disturbing were the files documenting witnesses who had died in their alternate realities while continuing to exist in their original forms. Deaths that were complete and verifiable, supported by autopsies, death certificates, and burial records, yet the deceased continued to live, breathe, and exist in other versions of reality. The implications were staggering and terrifying. If consciousness could be split across multiple realities, if death in one reality didn't prevent existence in others, then the fundamental assumptions about life, death, and human identity were incorrect. We were dealing with government capabilities that challenged not just the laws of physics, but the basic nature of what it means to be human. I tried to return the files through the official channels, but was told that no such documents existed, and that my possession of them couldn't be explained through any authorized distribution system. When I attempted to contact Inspector Grimwood to report the unauthorized delivery, I was informed that no one with that name worked for the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General. It was as if the entire investigation, including my interactions with Grimwood and the task force briefing, had been erased from official records. The only evidence that any of it had occurred were my personal memories and the classified case file that I was not authorized to retain or discuss. But the unauthorized files continued to arrive at irregular intervals, each delivery containing information about aspects of the witness protection program that operated beyond public knowledge or government acknowledgement. I learned about witnesses who existed in realities that spanned multiple time periods, their consciousness scattered across decades of artificially constructed existence. I read reports about protection methods that involved not just identity change, but fundamental alterations to memory, personality, and even physical appearance at the molecular level. Most disturbing of all were the files documenting the psychological effects on witnesses who became aware of their artificially constructed existences. Many developed severe dissociative disorders, unable to distinguish between genuine memories and implanted experiences. Some experienced complete psychological breaks, convinced that they were living in simulations or alternate dimensions created by malevolent forces. The suicide rate among witnesses who discovered the true nature of their protection was classified, but the files suggested it was significantly higher than reported in official statistics. The knowledge that one's entire existence was artificially constructed proved too much for many witnesses to bear, leading to desperate attempts to escape realities they could no longer trust. One file contained a report about a witness named Ophelia Grimwood who had been living in 17 different alternate realities simultaneously, her consciousness split across multiple versions of herself in different cities and time periods. The psychological strain of existing in multiple realities eventually caused her complete mental collapse, requiring her removal from the program and placement in a classified medical facility. Another file documented the case of Ephraim Blackthorne, a witness whose alternate reality had been constructed so thoroughly that it included false memories extending back to childhood. When he accidentally discovered evidence of his artificially constructed past, he became convinced that everyone he had ever known was part of an elaborate government conspiracy. His paranoid delusions eventually led to violent behavior that required his termination by federal personnel. The files painted a picture of a witness protection program that had evolved far beyond its original mission, becoming something that challenged the fundamental nature of human existence and consciousness. The technologies involved were so advanced that they blurred the line between reality and simulation, creating experiences that were indistinguishable from natural existence, but were actually products of government manipulation. As I continued to receive and study these unauthorized files, I began to experience psychological effects that mirrored those documented in the witness reports. I found myself questioning the nature of my own memories, wondering whether my career with the FBI was genuine or had been artificially implanted as part of some larger experiment. Sleep became elusive as I lay awake analyzing my past for evidence of artificial construction. The more I learned about the true scope of the Witness Protection Program, the more I understood why its existence was classified at the highest levels of government. These were capabilities that, if publicly acknowledged, would fundamentally alter human understanding of consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality itself. They were tools that could be used for purposes far beyond witness protection, with implications for social control, intelligence operations, and the manipulation of human civilization on a massive scale. But knowledge of these capabilities came with a price that I was only beginning to understand. Once you know that reality can be artificially constructed with perfect fidelity, how do you trust any experience or memory? Once you understand that consciousness can be manipulated and split across multiple existences, how do you maintain any sense of personal identity or continuity? The final file I received contained a single page with a message that chilled me to the bone. Agent Cross, your investigation of the Ambrose Whitlock case and your subsequent research into classified protection capabilities have been noted by agencies that monitor unauthorized access to sensitive information. Your knowledge of these programs represents a potential security risk that requires management through appropriate channels. You have two options. Accept reassignment to a division that specializes in classified protection operations, where your knowledge can be properly utilized and contained, or undergo memory modification procedures that will eliminate your awareness of these capabilities while leaving the rest of your memories intact. You have 7 days to decide. Failure to choose will result in the decision being made for you. Inspector P. Grimwood, Special Operations Division Classification Level, above Top Secret. The message made clear that my knowledge of the Witness Protection Program's true capabilities had made me a liability that the government could not allow to remain uncontrolled. Either I would join the system that created and managed alternate realities, or I would have my memories of it artificially removed. But both options represented the loss of my authentic self, either through absorption into a system that manipulated human consciousness for government purposes, or through direct alteration of my memories and identity. There was no choice that allowed me to remain who I was while retaining knowledge of what I had discovered. On the 6th day, I made a decision that I hoped would preserve some aspect of my authentic existence. I wrote a detailed account of everything I had learned about the Witness Protection Program's classified capabilities, including my interactions with Ambrose Whitlock, Inspector Grimwood, and the unauthorized files I had received. I documented the evidence I had seen, the conclusions I had reached, and the implications for human understanding of consciousness and reality. Then I sealed the account in multiple copies, to be delivered to specific individuals if I failed to maintain contact with them at regular intervals. It was my attempt to ensure that knowledge of these capabilities would survive whatever happened to my memories or identity. On the 7th day, I reported to the address specified in Inspector Grimwood's message, prepared to accept whatever fate awaited someone who had learned too much about government capabilities that officially didn't exist. The building was nondescript, located in a business district that could have been anywhere in suburban Virginia. There were no identifying signs or government seals, nothing to indicate its true purpose. Inspector Grimwood met me in the lobby, looking exactly as he had during our previous encounters. Agent Cross, I'm pleased that you decided to report voluntarily. It makes the process much simpler for everyone involved. Inspector Grimwood, before we proceed, I need to know, Am I making this choice as a free individual? Or has my decision been influenced through the same technologies used to create alternate realities for witnesses? He smiled, the expression carrying both sympathy and something that might have been regret. Agent Cross, that's the question that haunts everyone who becomes aware of these capabilities. Once you know that consciousness and memory can be artificially manipulated, how do you trust any decision or experience? How do you maintain certainty about the authenticity of your own thoughts and choices? But you're not going to answer my question. I can't answer your question, Agent Cross, because the answer would require knowledge that even I don't possess. The technologies we use to create and modify realities operate at levels of complexity that transcend individual understanding. Those who develop and implement them may not even fully comprehend their scope and implications. He led me to an elevator that required biometric identification to operate. As we descended to levels that weren't indicated on any floor display, he continued talking in a conversational tone that made the extraordinary seem routine. What I can tell you is that your investigation of the Ambrose Whitlock case was exemplary, and that your subsequent research demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical capability that our division requires. Whether your decision to report today was entirely your own, or was influenced by subtle psychological techniques, is ultimately irrelevant. What matters is that you're here, and that your knowledge can be properly utilized rather than contained. What division is this? Reality Management Operations, Agent Cross. We're responsible for creating and maintaining alternate realities for national security purposes, including but not limited to witness protection. We also handle cases where the existence of these capabilities threatens to become public knowledge, and situations where unauthorized personnel gain access to classified information about consciousness manipulation technologies. The elevator stopped at a level marked only with symbols that I didn't recognize. The doors opened onto a corridor that looked like it belonged in a high-tech research facility, with white walls, LED lighting, and security measures that were clearly designed to contain things far more dangerous than conventional criminals. Agent Cross, before we proceed to your orientation, I need to ask you a direct question. Do you believe that your investigation of the Whitlock case was entirely procedural, or do you suspect that it was designed to test your suitability for recruitment to this division? The question struck at the heart of paranoia that had been growing since my first encounter with the impossible evidence in Whitlock's case. Inspector Grimwood, I've wondered about that possibility, but I've had no way to determine the truth. If my entire investigation was orchestrated as a recruitment test, then nothing I believe about my own decision-making process can be trusted. And that uncertainty, Agent Cross, is something you'll have to learn to live with. Once you become aware of reality manipulation technologies, absolute certainty about the authenticity of experience becomes impossible. It's a psychological burden that everyone in this division carries. He stopped in front of a door that required multiple forms of identification to open. What I can tell you is that your investigation was genuine in the sense that you applied your professional skills to evaluate evidence and reach conclusions. Whether the evidence was naturally occurring or artificially created for your assessment is a distinction that becomes less meaningful as you gain experience with these technologies. And if I decide I can't accept that level of uncertainty about my own existence, then you'll undergo memory modification procedures that will eliminate your awareness of classified capabilities while preserving your ability to function as a federal agent. You'll return to your previous assignment with no recollection of the Whitlock case or our conversations, and you'll continue your career without the burden of knowledge that challenges your understanding of reality. But I won't be the same person. Agent Cross, we're all products of our experiences and memories. Modify the memories, and you inevitably modify the person. The question isn't whether you'll remain exactly the same. The question is whether you'll remain functional and content within the limitations of conventional understanding. The door opened onto a briefing room where several other individuals were seated around a conference table. Some looked like federal agents or military personnel, while others appeared to be scientists or technical specialists. All of them had the same slightly haunted expression that I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of people who worked with reality manipulation technologies. "Agent Cross," Inspector Grimwood said as we took seats at the table. "Welcome to Reality Management Operations. Your real education is about to begin." Over the following hours, I received briefings on government capabilities that challenged every assumption I had ever made about the nature of existence and consciousness. I learned about technologies that could create complete alternate realities indistinguishable from natural experience, methods for splitting consciousness across multiple existences, and procedures for modifying memory and identity at the neurological level. But perhaps most unsettling was learning about the scope of these operations. The Witness Protection Program represented only a small fraction of reality management activities. The same technologies were used to create cover identities for deep cover intelligence operatives, to provide fabricated histories for individuals involved in classified missions, and to manage populations whose knowledge of certain government capabilities posed security risks. The fundamental question, one of the briefers explained, isn't whether these technologies should exist. They already exist and have been operational for decades. The real question is how they should be used, and how their existence should be managed to maintain social stability and national security. How many people are living in artificially created realities? That information is classified beyond your current clearance level, Agent Cross. What I can tell you is that the number is significant enough to constitute a parallel population existing alongside conventional society, but small enough to maintain operational security and containment. What happens to people who discover the artificial nature of their existence? That depends on the individual case and the circumstances of discovery. Some adapt to the knowledge and continue functioning within their constructed realities. Others require memory modification to remove the traumatic awareness, and a small percentage have to be permanently removed from the program to prevent security breaches. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horrifying implications of what was being described. The federal government was not only creating artificial realities for thousands of people, but was also prepared to deal decisively with those who couldn't psychologically handle the truth about their existence. "Agent Cross," Inspector Grimwood said as the briefing concluded, "you now understand the true scope of reality management operations and the technologies we employ. Do you accept assignment to this division with full awareness of the psychological and ethical challenges it involves?" I looked around the room at the faces of people who had made the same choice I was being asked to make. Some appeared confident and committed to their work, while others showed signs of the psychological strain that came with manipulating the fundamental nature of human existence. All of them carried the burden of knowledge that most people would find impossible to bear. "Inspector Grimwood, if I accept this assignment, will I ever be able to trust my own memories and experiences again?" "Agent Cross, trust in the authenticity of experience is a luxury that people in our line of work cannot afford. What we have instead is commitment to using these technologies for purposes we believe serve the greater good, and acceptance of the uncertainty that comes with knowledge of their existence. And if I decline the assignment, then you'll undergo memory modification procedures designed to eliminate your awareness of these capabilities while preserving your ability to function as a federal agent. You'll return to your previous assignment with no recollection of the Whitlock case, our conversations, or this briefing. Will I still be me? You'll be a version of yourself that exists within the boundaries of conventional understanding, Agent Cross. Whether that version is more or less authentic than the person you are now is a philosophical question that we are not qualified to answer. The choice seemed impossible. Either accept a reality where nothing could be trusted as authentic, or surrender the memories and experiences that had shaped my understanding of the world. Both options represented the loss of some essential aspect of my identity. But as I sat in that briefing room, surrounded by people who had made similar choices and learned to live with their consequences, I realized that the decision had been made long before I arrived. The moment I had begun investigating Ambrose Whitlock's impossible claims, I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Knowledge, once acquired, could not be forgotten voluntarily. "I accept the assignment," I said, though the words felt like they were being spoken by someone else. Inspector Grimwood nodded with what might have been approval or sympathy. "Welcome to Reality Management Operations, Agent Cross. Your orientation will begin tomorrow, and your first assignment will involve investigating reports of unauthorized access to consciousness manipulation technologies by entities outside federal control." "What kind of entities?" "That, Agent Cross, is what you're going to help us determine. The technologies we've developed aren't the only methods for manipulating reality and consciousness. There are others, some of which predate government research by centuries or millennia, and some of them are actively opposing our operations." As I left the briefing room and prepared to begin my new role in reality management operations, I carried with me the knowledge that I'd crossed into a realm of government activity that operated beyond public acknowledgement or democratic oversight. I had become part of a system that created and managed alternate realities for purposes that challenged the fundamental nature of human existence. But I also carried the hope that by working within the system, I might be able to influence how these capabilities were used and ensure that they served purposes worthy of their extraordinary power. It was a fragile hope, but it was all I had left to preserve some sense of meaning and purpose in a world where authenticity had become impossible to verify. The Ambrose Whitlock case had ended not with resolution, but with the revelation that reality itself was far more malleable than I had ever imagined, and I had become part of the machinery that shaped that reality, for better or worse. Some cases don't end with arrests and convictions. Some cases end with the investigator becoming part of the mystery they set out to solve. And some knowledge extracts a price that continues to compound long after the investigation is officially closed. I am Agent Serafina Cross, and I work for Reality Management Operations, creating and managing alternate existences for purposes that I hope serve the greater good. But late at night, when I lie awake questioning the authenticity of my own memories and experiences, I wonder whether I am investigating reality or simply living in another carefully constructed version of it. The truth, I have learned, is both more complex and more fragile than I ever imagined. And sometimes, the only thing worse than not knowing the truth is discovering that truth itself can be artificially manufactured with perfect fidelity. The case remains open because reality, once you understand its malleable nature, is always subject to revision.